All right, I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting for April 23rd to order. All members are present and accounted for. I think we need to amend today's agenda to go back and pick up the Finance Committee agenda from yesterday. There are 4 attachments in yesterday's agenda. So I would ask for a motion to amend the agenda to add finance onto our agenda.
Go ahead, Fred. Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We have minutes for today to approve.
Chair approval of the minutes is written.
I haven't seen them.
They're attached to the agenda.
Okay. Still haven't seen them. I'll second.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question, and maybe this reflects back on the minutes. Did we appropriately adjourn the morning meeting yesterday before we started the afternoon meeting? Or was there something that we needed to do?
No, it was done.
It was done.
Yeah, you know that Takia would never let us not appropriate.
Okay. Why? Okay. So it was done. I just didn't recall when it was done.
All right. So we
I would apologize for being about 9 or 10 minutes late yesterday afternoon. I had a call from a constituent, believe it or not, and it was on a tree cutting issue that I had to be had to go out to the scene of the crime, if you will, to help settle matters, or at least try to help settle matters. It couldn't be put off, but I apologize, but I got here as soon as I could.
All right, so I believe we have a motion to approve both sets of minutes. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. I would ask that we, well, let me just ask the committee. We have both finance and law here. I hate to keep law on the hook for an hour while we do finance unless they find finance fascinating. My sense is we should return to yesterday's agenda. There's 4 pieces of material that we need to look at from finance, and then that could take certainly a better part of an hour, I'm sure, and then we would go to today's agenda where law would be next.
Well, I would suggest if law is ready to go that we do them, because they're going to end up waiting and wasting an awful lot of time, whereas Jody has to be here anyway. Whether she likes it or not.
I concur. I think we should let the law department go first. They waited through a whole meeting last week and didn't get to go. I'm sorry, Jody, but he's right. You're here with us. You're stuck, so.
All right, then we will proceed with the agenda with the hearing from the Department of Law. City Attorney Lyle, you're on.
All right, thank you very much, all. We're so happy to be here. This is not a chore or a toil for us. We're always happy to talk about the things that the office is doing and the strides we've made in just 4 or 5 months. I have Ms. Karen Steele with me from the office, since she has diligently helped to prepare a lot of the detail associated with the office, and her experience has assisted us in preparing the information you see before you and presenting that to detail the budget. What I'll be doing is basically going through a slide presentation of about 9 slides, 7 or 8 slides, and giving you the overview of the office. We'll talk detail on numbers, and we'll talk about how the office is structured and how that will continue to assist the city in meeting its financial and budgetary objectives. And so the first page, hopefully that you have that in front of you.
We do.
Okay, very good. The Office of Law, the vision of the Office of Law is to strive to be a premier municipal office of law in the state of Maryland. The office will be a well-respected, reliably focused source for top-notch lawyering, including legislative counsel and drafting, vigorous defense of lawful actions and enactments by the city government, and careful preparation and custody of official legislative documents and records for the benefit of city government and the public. The mission of the Office of Law is to protect and legal legislative counsel, representation before judicial and quasi-judicial boards and tribunals, and to serve as administrator and custodian of the city's legislative records and documents, among other things. The reason we laid this out is because this directly tracks with how we will spend the city's money to effectuate the purposes of the office and the city and its mission and objectives. The Office of Law is broken down into several sub-organizations, although we see ourselves as one team. So if you go to slide 3, there we go. In the legal department, if you will, the legal team is legal defense, prosecution of municipal infractions, advice and counsel to boards and commissions, labor negotiations and collections, all of which will be made clear to you as we walk through the numbers. We also have legislative services, and we also have a city clerk team that provides also executive support to the city council, as well as custodian and publishing of records, updates of the city code, as well as alcohol beverage control, and then covering and controlling, administering elections, if you will. Slide 4. Our goals are simple. We have 8 of them. First goal is to provide timely legal advice, and these goals track with the budget book as well as our performance measures that we provided earlier this year. Our goal 1 is to provide timely legal advice to all of our clients, including city council, city officials, departments, agencies, boards, and commissions. That's important because we have taken on more work than we had previously. And we have, I think, saved the city some money because we had probably 4 or 5 outside attorneys doing some of this work to the tune of about $150,000 over the course of a year. And we're going to take some of that work back as we transition not only this year, but into the next year. Goal 2, prepare legally supportable legislation. That's important because when we have legally supportable legislation that is not subject to challenge, that is not confusing, that is clear, direct, concise, and is in accordance with legislative drafting models, we are then able to move on to other things and not have to always defend legislative enactments. Goal 3, successfully represent the city in court and quasi-judicial tribunals and administrative proceedings. We're doing more of that this year or in the new year. We're starting to take on more of that from some of our outside counsels, but we've also improved the strategy, how we look at all of these kinds of representational issues for the city in all of the different forums that we currently are in. Goal 4, next slide.
Mr. City Attorney and
Sure.
Also Mr. City Manager, I think later on, I reviewed your slides ahead of time.
Sure.
You do talk to us about some of the other things that are in the performance measure system, benchmarks, and so forth. I think that's when you're talking about your goals. I think for the future of the performance measurement system, and certainly is helpful for the budget process, it would be helpful to have not only the goals and objectives, but also the benchmarks and the performance measures. This is a new process. I hasten to say I'm delighted with how it has worked so far, but I think pretty much all of the departments, that's sort of the next step I see in fulfilling the promise of the performance measures, is to lay out the goals, objectives, benchmarks, and the performance measures, because it is the performance measures, to me, the ultimate argument for why your budget needs to be what it is. And so I'm just interrupting you, I know, but I wanted to note that for the record for next year, because I do believe there will be a next year, virus withstanding. I hope there is, but just to mention on all of these that that would be a helpful new embellishment as we go forward.
Great, thank you for that, Frank. Thank you for that. I'm just kind of summarizing the slides here, and there's a point in time which we can ask questions, and we can go back to any slide that you might find particularly important. So as we move to goal 4, it's prepare and provide for safe custody of legislative legal records and documents of the city. Process applications for alcohol license, goal 5. Goal 6, provide legal counsel to city boards and commissions and executive staff support to standing committees. Goal 7, staff and manage a trusted, error-free citywide election in FY21, as well as Goal 8, provide legal advice to departments in responding timely and appropriately to Public Information Act requests. The reason that Goal 7 is there is because we are anticipating, or we had anticipated maybe possibly special election, maybe 1, maybe 2, as well as we have to start preparing in FY21 for the general election in 22. And there's some expenditures related to FY22's election in FY21.
Whoa, wait a minute. Maybe 2, that's kind of spooky. Is there something we don't know? Maybe 2 special elections?
Well,
never mind. Never mind.
Yeah, I just go with what I'm told. Okay. So let me see. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is the summary of our expenditures. You may or may not know that the Office of Law, probably we have a budget of 1.4 million, but we probably are involved with an impact somewhere between 1.5 and $2 million of the city's money directly in legal service contracts where we might hire outside legal counsel, and we have over the last several years. Some of that we're going to take back, but we've expended, $200,000 or $300,000 in the last several years with outside counsel, and we want to take some of that back, and that will hopefully relieve some of the pressure on the city budget. Additionally, the legal services that we either contract for or that we're involved in directly impact the city's budget in other areas by meeting the demands of litigation, as well as workers' compensation, where we might have negotiated, settled, or won in a case, saving the city some money as well in that regard. As well as, we're involved in some pretty heavy litigation out of the self-insurance fund. There are legal fees being paid out of that fund, but we also anticipate, at least looking back at maybe having to make payouts, if not in negotiated settlements in losses. We hope to win these cases, but gives you a view of the indirect impact we have when we can be effectively staffed, appropriately supplied, and positioned as an office to effectively advocate the best interests of the city. So I'll go through the summary sheet here, and it's important to note at the top, budget from last year, I guess we call it a baseline, FY 2020, the budget was 1.315 for the Office of Law. Next year, we anticipate our expenditures to match about $1.4 million, an $85,000 increase, 6%, which is a great, even though we're trying to cut. What we found is that we had in the last year, we had some personnel issues. We weren't fully staffed. We were contracting out a lot of legal work, and we took on legal work that had not been anticipated, such as defending our position against the state retirement system because of things that decisions we made with respect to payment of pensions. And so we expect the legal fees this fiscal year to run into next fiscal year. And so we anticipate having to need money to pay for that. But despite all of that, we only see an increase of about 6%. We added 2 attorneys, myself and another lawyer. We think we brought on extensive experience in a lot of areas that would help us to bring more of the external contracted legal work back in-house and saving the city more money. Salaries, not a change in salaries. If you look at the contracted legal services, we go from 113,878 to the 190, and that's most of that's made up from the state retirement issue that we were having to deal with, and we had to hire outside counsel. The city decided to hire outside counsel last year. We expect more money to be spent as we defend our position in that case, and that's pretty much the biggest jump. Also, we've had some. We expect that all of the other lines you see, postage, telephone, supplies, copier, training and education, dues and memberships, are more so related to the fact that we have 2 attorneys this year, additional to last year. And so it's the care and feeding of those individuals. We've had to, I thought it was a good idea to reorganize the office in a way to make us more nimble. So we now have cell phones for more of our attorneys and more of our staff. It's been very helpful during this period because when we're teleworking, we need to contact individuals and contact staff. And we anticipate having more cell phones in the next fiscal year so that we can stay in touch with folks and be always available to solve problems. Increases in supplies, copier, and training. You have a question, sir?
Well, no, please finish, but I do have a question once you go through this.
Sure. And then the supplies, copier, training, and education. Basically, we're providing the same level of support to more attorneys. Last year, we had a mix of attorney, going from 4 to 3 to 2 and back to 4 attorneys this year. So it's really just kind of meeting the needs of these new attorneys, as well as making sure we have training and support for these attorneys as they meet the needs of the city in addressing some of those issues that we were paying $200 an hour or $300 or $500 an hour to deal with. It's going to be dealt with in-house. And then charges and services, some of that is going to be the money that we would use to pay for the code, pay for some election items, but there's not enough there right now, but we'll talk about that in a second. And that kind of makes up the summary of our budget request, a 6% increase, but basically same for salary and wages and a slight bump for contracted legal services in order to deal with an area that is critical to our dealing with the state and how we handle pensions. Next slide.
Well, can we stop for a second, though?
Sure.
I wanted to point out to my colleagues on the Finance Committee, but also to the Finance Director and City Manager Gerald. I'm looking at the last line item budget that I have, and it replicates this schedule exactly. There is more detail in the one that I'm looking at because it happened to have been an election year. So there was a breakout of all of the election expenses in addition. But this is, I'm going to ask Sheila and Fred, but for me, I will say this is the kind of level that I think could very easily go on page 74 of our budget binder and speaks exactly to helping us understand the increases, as you say, city attorney, are really minuscule, but it lays it out on a level of detail that are very easy for us to understand what's going on. So I like this format that you've given us very much.
And
Sure.
Can I interject something here?
Please, I was making those comments for your benefit.
Thank you. The line items here don't agree with the FY21 proposed mayor's budget. They're off in total by about 10,000, and in components, they're off in many cases. So I don't know if this is what they originally requested. But if you take that line item detail, Ross, I would be surprised if it totals what's in the budget book, because I don't know. They're not too far off. They're just all been increased or decreased slightly. So I have to figure out what the source of this information was.
Well, and again, that's one of the things that having this level of detail really helps us ferret out. I would add that one of my frustrations, I hate to see, well, no, we do have it up at the top. So we can directly compare up at the top the total let's see, for 20 and for 21, now we can't. So I'm trying to find a total.
He's got the total at the top, 1400600.
Right.
Our total is 1410800, and again, the salaries have all gone up, and it's their total salary line would be 888, and their total benefits line would be 320. So I think everything's just up or down, but I just wanted to know, these don't exactly compare to the budget that the mayor proposed. So we probably want to get this revised for you. I just didn't want you to be confused. It's not too far off, but
No, but I think this is really a great case in point, and I'll remind my two colleagues, Sheila and Fred, that when we were looking at line item details in the past administration, particularly from fire, but also from police, quite often the line item details that the departments had did not match the details that the finance department had. And it was often the source of some sorting out of things. So there are benefits to having this level of detail over and above just helping us have a better understanding of what's going on within the expenditure numbers. So again, I ask for your comment, Sheila and Fred, but this is the kind of level of breakout that we've had in the past that I find to be useful. That may be a personal foible. If it is, I'll have to figure out a way to deal with it. But if it's something that you two find useful, I think I'd really like to see this kind of detail.
agreed.
Well, thank you for that, and we will update the numbers here. It's probably just my looking at a lot of spreadsheets over the last week or so and missed a number or two, but we'll correct those. But I would say that salary and wages is something that we don't really have a lot of flexibility with in the office. From the management's perspective, we just kind of deal with the contracted legal services to the charge and services lines. We just wanted to kind of make sure you had everything in front of you because we did have an increase in salary and wages. I thought we did, but you know.
Yeah, no, Mike, I think this might be an earlier version of the budget. When you go into Munis and you're entering your request in, the numbers being the same on salaries and benefits, I think that tells me that this was the department's initial request.
Yes, right.
That's correct. This is
May I ask, I do find it of value, Ross, so I agree with you. Mr. Lyles, you mentioned early on that there was going to be savings because we're going to be doing more of the legal work in-house.
Sure.
Where do you reflect and what do you expect that savings to be?
Well, if you look at the contracted legal services from in that line item, the increase 113 to 190, there's really a reduction in there. You can't really see it because the amount of legal dollars we're spending for the retirement issue with the state is really a large share of that 190 now, and not other fees. So I would say it like this: we have we're going to be taking over certain items of legal work that will not reflect itself in the way you see the 113 to the 190. Really, there was a reduction of the 113 because we have less work to do in, say, commissions and boards. We had an outside attorney doing board work, and that outside attorney has reduced their work, and we've taken more of it because we saw that there would not be a conflict with us representing that, representing those boards and commissions. For instance, alcohol beverage, that's kind of my board. I take that and do that. We don't need outside counsel for that because as a city, we don't appear before the alcohol beverage board and we don't really have a conflict there. So we took that back. And so there'll be less dollars, mostly for boards and commissions. But going forward, we also know that had we not made the decision to bring some of that work back in-house, the number that you see, the 190, would probably be more expanded than just 190, because we're going to also be taking over the work for the Pension and Fire Commission. We're going to be looking at, and we are looking at work related to collections to see where we can have savings there. And some of the work that we're doing in litigation is also a help there, because what happens is we're able to support our budget by defending the city properly, and that money comes out of the special insurance fund. So there's a savings there when we represent the city out of the self-insurance fund.
I guess that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for where there's a savings. I would expect that instead of there being an $85,000 increase, that there would be a greater savings in your department because you're bringing more work in-house.
Yeah,
if that is because you're using the self-insurance fund, then at some point we've got to reflect the savings there.
Yeah, here's the issue with that. A lot of, that's what I said about direct and indirect. A lot of the work that we do is an indirect savings to the city's total budget, not to ours. So, and here with the savings, with bringing some things in, boards and commission representation, all of that savings is right there in the difference between the 113 in 2020 and the 190. You can't see it because we had the special unanticipated issue that we had to pay for, and we anticipate those services being, however, I would say too that it's hard to tell with the number there, because I think what we've done with the state retirement issue is assist outside counsel, not only in strategy, but how to craft the arguments. That has saved us money. I don't know how I would show that other than to say that they probably would bill us twice as much if we weren't so intimately involved in how that work is done. And so I've assigned attorneys to work with outside counsel in a way that helps to reduce the amount of money that we might be called upon to spend if we had a bill. So you can't show that in direct numbers. I can just tell you that I know we're saving money because we're doing some of the work.
Can you give me an example of the savings across the city? I mean, I thought all law costs came through I thought all law costs came through your department.
Yeah, no, they don't. So let me give you an example. We had a workers' compensation case that, based on, and this case had been going on for a while, we made a decision to settle and resolve that case rather than go to a decision of the Workers' Compensation Board. Had we gone to the Workers' Compensation Board, we were looking at a legal outcome that might have cost us more than what we resolved the case for over the long term. That the money that we would be paying comes out of someone else's budget in the city to effectuate that resolution. Doesn't come, we don't handle the money related to settlements. Additionally, one of our attorneys this year won 2 cases, one on summary judgment and one at trial, that potentially could have cost us upwards of $1 million in both cases, 2 police cases. And so there's savings there, but we don't see those payouts. Those payouts come from either the self-insurance fund, or they come out of some other budget. And workers' compensation come out of the self-insurance fund. So we're seeing money that we wouldn't have to pay out because we're successful in resolving cases in a way that we think is better financially for us, or winning them outright where we don't have to make the payout.
Jody, you were getting ready to add something.
So when you get the corrected numbers here, that 190 is actually 144 800. So when you're talking about increases, there is a bit of an increase there. I think that 190 may have initially included bond counsel, and bond counsel is in my budget. So we removed that out of the 190. So you're comparing 113.8 to 144. And what I think Mr. Lyles is saying to you is that if we didn't have this specialist working on this state pension issue, that number 144,800 would be a lot lower, because we have some in there for that purpose, which shouldn't repeat itself.
Right, and we're kind of in a way through this reveal with the budget, asking for permission to manage all the lawyers and have all the money associated with them, so that we can show you these savings, where we're kind of in the middle with kind of new management, new organization, kind of management style for how we do these kinds of things. And some of that some of the confusion is reflected in that coming in the middle of this process, whereas I didn't have access to actually reorganization earlier in the year. But it's my thought and it's my wish that we have control over all the lawyers, whoever they're doing work for in the city. They do the work for us, and we help to strategize with them, help to keep costs low, hourlies at a reasonable amount, and making sure that we can negotiate reasonable fees. If we do that at the 190, even with bond counsel, we're going to see those significant savings, and those savings over the course of the year as I get to build my budget from the ground up, having had a year worth of experience with these attorneys. And so that's why you see the 190, because I'm asking for control over the lawyers, no matter who they're working for. If I have control over the lawyers, we're going to produce, I think, more savings, and I'll be able to show that better in the next fiscal year budget.
Well, and I think that we would prefer to see that also. I think my question was more along the line of where the cost savings are showing up, because this shows a 67% increase. And even though Jody has given us the new numbers, I don't see a significant decrease in expenditures because we're bringing the work in-house. So maybe because it's in workman's comp or in the self-insured fund or wherever else it may appear, those savings do exist. I was just hoping that we would see it somewhere. And as you're saying, in the next go round with the budget, next year I'm talking about, then you'll be better prepared to show that in your summary chart.
Oh, Sheila,
yes,
let me interject. And Fred, I see you're trying to too. But first of all, I think, Sheila, you're raising some excellent points. And I think these are things that are ripe for being a footnote. The kinds of things that the city attorney is explaining to us are the things that the council needs to know about to understand how the city's budget is operating. I think the kinds of proposals you're making, Mike, are ones that need to be handled outside of the budget with the city manager, and the council probably could conceivably get into some legislation, but certainly some kind of a policy that's explicit about how all of those things are controlled. I understand your desire to be able to have broader management purview over those things. So I think those are really good points. And I would really ask you to send the Finance Committee an elaboration of those very points you're making, because those are the kinds of things that we can pass on to our colleagues on the council. I would argue that anytime any department shows an increase like this, what is shown currently is the $76,000, that's something that's ripe for a footnote. And so just looking at the number doesn't tell the whole story.
We can do that. We can we'll update this and to reflect the changes that we talked about, and then we'll show the savings in a drop down for each of that line item. That should be.
And while you're updating, I think you need to go back and look at the numbers for 2020. Also, I don't think they match what we're seeing in the budget book. Thank you for catching that, Ellie. And so, but again, for two other things. One, this is the kind of table that is really helpful. Two, I want to comment on some of the things that I've noticed that you and the Office of Law are doing. You have been showing up at all of our council committee meetings and a lot of the board and commission meetings, and I think that level of effort is very much noticed and appreciated, and I think is important. So I want to commend you and under your direction the work that Joelle in particular has been doing by being there to support the city. I think that's a major improvement. And there's been many others, and I should probably write you a list of things that I think are improvements so you'll know we do notice it and appreciate it. But I did want to comment on that. Fred has been waiting patiently to speak.
Well, maybe not so patient, but most of what I was going to say you already took care of. I think that it's not a complicated concept. I think putting it in a footnote is just fine. The idea is that if you're going to pay a doctor to replace 2 shoulders and 2 knees, and the doctor all of a sudden, another doctor comes in, your own doctor maybe comes in and replaces one of the knees, well, the original doctor's not going to charge you for the whole thing because you've taken care of part of it. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. No more, no less. And I think it's easily explainable. I don't know that we have to go to great lengths to do that, but you know, you're the chairman. I just don't think it's complicated, and I think they do a good job of doing exactly what Mr. Lyles described.
I hate it when you talk medical.
Yeah,
right,
based on my professional experience.
Okay.
Yes, you've had that. So I think we're ready.
Okay, next slide. Just 2
Yes.
more slides, and we can take your fuller questions as well. Office of Law and budget changes explained. Basically, when you look at the 6% and some of the savings, we give kind of a broad overview of some things that affected the budget. Hiring 2 new attorneys after having some staff issues throughout the year on the law side. I talked about supplies, postage, copiers, dues and memberships, telephone and training, all related to just hiring 2 attorneys, myself and another attorney. Contract services, we talked about that, and we'll update the numbers for you. Charges and services, legal research and legal resources increased costs, and contractual services related to keeping the code updated and legal research tools that we're using. And we may see more of that because a lot of the numbers that we prepared were prior to COVID. And so we have other expenses related to that, and those may continue, so we may be asking for enhancements. Unanticipated enhancements, again, the cell phones, mainly related to just how I organize the office, but also as we look at COVID and teleworking, if it continues into the next budget year, may or may not, but we may see some benefits in teleworking that will extend into the next year, and then having cell phones for so staff can use office resources versus their own might be helpful. And then with the elections, whether it's one special election to the tune of about $21,000 for a special election, maybe 2 special elections, and maybe a general election where we have to start spending money in FY21 for the 22 general election, is unanticipated enhancements that we may be asking for to enhance our budget.
$63,000.
Jody, can I ask, if we had an unanticipated special election right now, would that come out of the contingency fund or the, I don't know what we call it anymore, but the extra money fund? You're on mute. Jody, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm just having a shock here because I've turned off everybody else's picture and all I can see is myself. So as long as you hear me, I got to figure out how to fix that. But so we did not include any funds in here for a special election. When we had started off, there was thoughts that Alderman Rodriguez was going to his position would need to be replaced. So therefore, we didn't know if we needed that one. And City Manager Gerald told me that as of right now, they're going to try to accomplish that replacement another way. If we do need a special election funding for that, we'll need to move it from contingency. And then there was a possible second special election because I think some of the council members had put their hat in the ring for a spot in the state legislature. So that's passed. So those were the two that had been talked about. And so right now we don't anticipate a special election. If we do have to have one, we'll have to move funding from somewhere else. And then the only open question on elections is whether we have some the city's election will take place in 22. And we may need to have some advanced funding for that. I'm not sure, I've never handled it from that perspective. I wasn't here during the last election. So whether or not we need FY21 monies for the FY22 election, then we'll have to put some money in that budget for that.
I think Regina has a comment, and then
the election is in 21.
It's in calendar 21.
Fiscal year 22.
It's fiscal year 22.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Correct.
So Duan, you're on mute, but did you have a question?
Yeah. So, for example, I know in our special election, we really had 1,000 people turn out. Why is it 21 grand?
Yeah.
Because that's the recent estimate we received from the contractor was 21,000.
When we did that tiny special election in Ward 6, the city paid roughly $20,000 for that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. There's a lot of expenses that goes into that. Not just the one you see on the surface, the apparent ones. There's a lot of background. We had to pay the to help with some of that. And yes, the total cost was in the 20,000 range.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, we received a estimate from one of the companies. Apparently, there were a couple of companies that do this work. Now there's like only one, and so we anticipate 21,000. And those prices may go up since they're the only company that we might rely on. So that's an issue for us as well.
Finance Committee, I have a procedural question. My anticipation had been that we would get all of the council members' budget books updated with these PowerPoint presentations. Another option, which could be instead of or in addition to, Mike, I find these footnotes, the budget changes explained, to be very helpful. It raises a few more questions, I must admit, but I think if not in this year's budget binder, in future year's budget binder, it would be good to have a budget changes explained section in the book. It could head off a lot of questions. So with the additional level of detail in the expenditures, and then with these kinds of footnotes, I think that it makes the budget book itself much more self-explanatory. And I put that question to you, Sheila and Fred, whether you think that's something worth considering from the Finance Committee.
I'm not clear of your question, whether we want his footnotes to be an amendment to the presentation.
I think these footnotes in the slide we're looking at now are really footnotes to what could be the expanded line item detail for expenditures, and combined showing that detail and showing these footnotes. For example, when I saw the slide about the charges and services, which doesn't show up in the budget binder, but immediately I had a question about that. Mike anticipated that and explained it to us orally. And here there is a thing here talking about the charges associated with legal research and legal resource, increased costs and contractual services. At least there's that note. And then if somebody, maybe Fred, for example, who understands law better than I, would have a question about that, it would be a marker to say, let's get some more information on that. So I'm just arguing that as we make this budget binder more robust, footnotes are a good thing, and sections like this are a good thing, and we need to get them. For example, Duana, if you're still on, are you updating your budget binder with all of these things that the Finance Committee is getting from the PowerPoints and these explanations we're receiving from the departments?
So I have the original binder that they gave out. I have the PowerPoints that they sent.
Okay.
That I can't keep up with is when we get like just random loose PDFs. I don't even, yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome to the club. Having the same problem, but Takia's going to take care of us on that one, I'm sure. So I guess maybe I'm beating a dead horse. I think it's clear that getting explanations like this and having footnotes, particularly when there's an increase in a budget, are helpful things, serves everyone well. And I will I'll be making a recommendation when we do our report to the council that that's something we do for the future, if not for this year's budget binder, certainly for the future.
Mr. Chair, Mr.
yes.
Lyles, his report.
Yeah, we're on page 8, ma'am. I won't read all of those, but I have 7 goals, long-term goals, FY22 to FY25. And that pretty much ends my report. And I can take questions on anything that I've covered today.
So,
I guess
go ahead, Sheila.
I guess the one thing, and Ross, you've already mentioned this, is how we measure the success of these goals, long-term and short-term. Mr. Lyles, do you have something you could share with us? Not right at this moment, but I think we'd like to see whether you meet your goals in over what period of time.
Right. Yeah. It's not what I would produce and what I plan to produce is straightforward. But in 4 months, it's kind of difficult to see how some of the changes reflect themselves because we had to prepare this budget in January, February, and I got here in December. I would say, give you an example. We have municipal infractions, and to this point, we may have been going to enforce those municipal infractions in court. So when we're successful, we bring money back to the city in that way. Yes, and collections, similarly, we just looked at the collections attorneys' work that we were paying to do collections for finance, for real property tax assessments. And that attorney was being paid about $54,000, something in that range, on a contingency basis, bringing back about $190,000 to the city. The question for us is, can we do better than $190,000 and at a savings of the $54,000 contingency money that comes out of that, out of the money collected? Don't know if we can do better, but I'd like to think we could with some additional support budget enhancements. We might be able to produce greater savings. So rather than pay out an additional 54 plus the, out of the money collected, the city gets to save that money. So those are some of the things we're looking at goals. And I'd like to, have a full year of seeing how this works. We still have up until June 30 to see the work of all of these lawyers that are doing work for the city. We can maybe properly assess it and get back to you with some updates.
Can we go back one slide, Julian, please, to the slide with the goals? I was thinking, for example, you've accomplished the first goal in that you hired a junior attorney. I don't know about the certified paralegal to take over municipal infractions, but
well, let me say this.
You've already. Can I finish first before you?
Sure. Because
you've already accomplished part of that, and that's what I'm looking for. Sure. What is it you have accomplished and what's the benchmark that you're going to accomplish?
Okay, well, the hiring of an attorney was not an accomplishment really because we were backfilling. So we were down 2 lawyers at the end of last year. And so we hired an experienced lawyer because the office already had experienced lawyers. So to hire 1 additional is a budget enhancement because we had already been budgeted for 4 lawyers and we didn't have 4 lawyers throughout the whole of last year.
But the point is that was a goal, that you had to backfill that position. So you had to hire a position.
Well, that was a goal maybe from last budget year, but for the 22 for the out years, I'm looking for a junior lawyer, not one with a lot of experience who can handle some of this kind of work, or a certified paralegal who can do more of this kind of basic, non-complex work, but very voluminous kind of work.
Okay, so I'll take that one away from you. I was trying to give you.
No, I know what you're saying. I mean,
but never mind.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. No, I understand where you're going, but I do want to make sure that we're clear together as we talk the same language. We're already budgeted for 4 lawyers from last budget year to this budget year. I need a new lawyer. In addition to 4, I need 5 or a paralegal.
We need measurements. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So I have many questions on this page, but Fred has once again been waiting patiently. So go ahead, Fred.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lyle, I noticed in last year's goals for the law office, and I know you weren't part of this for most of the year, but I'm going to ask these questions anyway. There are a list of about 13, and I'm most interested in 2 of them, and that is reviewing procurement policies and coordinating with the Department of Finance and the city manager to develop and introduce or implement new city procurement law. And number 7 is all of our favorite, that is the zoning code. And essentially what it says is revising the zoning code. How are we doing on any of these? Are they gone? Is that a thought that isn't ever going to happen? Where are we?
Yeah, and that's why if you look at my goal 6, charter review and city code rewrite, this is part of that. So, and it's already been done. When I walked into the position, there was some rewriting going on by you folks and by the other departments that you're working with. And so we're continuing with that. The zoning code is part of that, and we're doing some changes. We've got some changes prepared now, and it's been a slow roll, but I see all of that as part of the rewrite. And additionally, what we do when we bring legislation before you, we're also making suggestions on parts of the code that you hadn't thought about in a particular change that you're making, because what I found is that when you change one thing, we have maybe forgotten to change the 5 other places in the code where a thing existed. And so we've got to make sure that we do that as well. So that's all part of the rewrite. It's a slow rollout. I don't think it's something you do all in one fell swoop, but the city had already been marching down that road, and we just want to continue with that and make sure that we're thinking about these things every time we change or add. Well,
the zoning code, I have to tell you, is something we anticipated probably having to hire somebody to do. I mean, that sucker's a couple of volumes thick. I mean, we've got 34 different zoning categories, and it's crazy. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we could probably handle, but it would require us to sit down and determine how important it is to you, because every time we have legislation come to the council, we're changing the zoning code almost in every meeting. And so if you want to do a total rewrite, then you got to stop changing things until we do the whole rewrite, in my view. But while we're changing things, we have been able to adjust other parts of the code. Like, for instance, we'll change the part of the code and a definition wasn't even, a term wasn't defined, or maybe there are different definitions for a thing in the code in various places. So what we're trying to do is, kind of make those adjustments on the fly as we go along.
All right. And while I've got the microphone, because I may never see it again, let's where are we with the opioid lawsuit? And also, there's one that you haven't mentioned that I keep getting copies of everything on, and that is somebody suing us apparently over in a class action suit, or at least they're trying to, about our water bill. Can you comment on that? I mean, I don't expect you to tell us anything that you shouldn't do. But.
Yeah, let me talk about the opioid litigation. The opioid litigation, we're in federal court in Ohio, and it is slow going right now because the forum is not in Maryland, and because we're part of a case with other plaintiffs, it's just a slow roll right now trying to deal with the court in another state. There is an attorney handling that matter for us on a contingency basis, and was hired before I came, and that matter is what it is. We are responding to subpoenas right now as we speak, and trying to deliver on that discovery, but there's not a lot of movement on the case right now. I mean, we don't know where it's going to end up at the end of the day. With respect to this alleged class action suit relating to a water bill, the city has not been sued, nor has the city been served, nor is the city liable on any issue out of those documents that you may be receiving. So I read them, but until we're served or sued or brought into court in a jurisdiction that we have some contacts with, I don't have anything more to say than that.
All right. About the outside counsel, it seems like, I'll be honest, it seems to me that the amount you have allotted is a little bit low with the inspection lawsuit, for lack of a better term. We're being represented by outside counsel. Isn't there another big one or two other big ones that we're being represented by?
Well, we do have a firm that is handling the inspection lawsuit, and that money to pay that firm is coming out of our self-insurance fund, so it would not be reflected in my budget. Although between myself and a couple of attorneys here in the office, we're doing a lot of work as well. Again, keeping the costs low in payouts, because we're helping to draft letters, helping to review documents, reviewing agreements, reviewing discovery, preparing discovery responses and things like that, and forwarding to counsel, named counsel, to file and to deal with. So, we're probably helping to keep legal fees reasonable and manageable because we're actively involved in the case.
City Attorney
Thank you. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can help us in the breakdown of legal services if anybody wants that. That's in the mayor's proposed budget. Would you like a breakdown?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Yes, Katie, in answer to your question, Sheila, let me have a go for a minute. I want to point out that this slide is not the long-term goals that are presented in the performance management terms that we were given earlier, I guess last month. And it is a combination of enhancement requests and goals. So, for example, goal 5, I don't think that's a goal that, if it's a goal at all, is something that should really be taken up with the city manager. It is definitely a budget initiative, but again, it's not commensurate with what is presented in the performance management documents that we were given. And in fact, few of these as presented here reflect what was given in our performance management objectives for the long-term goals. The one that I really want to focus on, though, is goal 6. And I think that is something that, again, is not in the goals, but is something that really needs some discussion with the council. I don't know of any directive for the Office of Law to review and rewrite the charter and the code. And in fact, I know that's something that is often recommended when we have the decennial Charter Review Commission, and it's roundly ignored. But I would think before the Office of Law embarks on a, I can't think of, I'm grasping for a more politic term, but I'll just say unilateral effort to rewrite the city code, we need to have a sit down with the council and make sure that that's a policy of the council and the direction that the council wants to go in. When we rewrote Title 21 back in 2004, that was a massive undertaking, and Fred is correct, it was done with outside help. It was supposed to have been a simplification and reorganization of Title 21. It turned out to be a rewrite of Title 21. And when it got to the then council, two particular council members added even more rewrite at the last minute with no public input. And lots of things, bad things can happen without having sort of a policy overview and objective. And so I don't think this is one of the goals that's set forth in the performance management thing, but to the extent it is a goal of yours, of the Office of Laws, I think we need to have some discussion with the council and the policymakers about what exactly this goal is. I will never, ever argue that we cannot improve our code, and certainly particular parts of it, although I'm not sure Title 21 is nearly as bad as people would argue, largely people who don't fully know it. But I think if this is an assumption that this is a goal for the Office of Law, I think we need to have a much more explicit discussion about what this goal is, what the pervasiveness of it is. I think that you probably will need more resources, maybe not necessarily another lawyer, but certainly this is a very complicated part of governance, local governance. And so I for one, I don't see this as being consistent with the long-term goals that are set forth. And I definitely on this one would like to have a lot more discussion to make sure everybody knows where this is headed. I don't think it's been discussed in front of the council. And I think that it does need to be, and maybe all going in the right direction, but I think we, at a minimum, we need to know what that direction is.
Agreed.
Thank you.
May I make a request? I'm sorry, did Fred still have the floor?
Nope, go right ahead.
May I suggest that at some point, not necessarily associated with this budget process, that the law department come to us in a closed session and give us an update on all legal cases that are pending.
We'd be happy to do that.
That used to be scheduled quarterly,
Right.
in a closed session, and
Oh,
they
we
were
can-
very helpful.
We
And
can do that again. No problem. We can make it happen. Yep.
When you do it, Mr. City Attorney, you will need to know that the council is flabbergasted by the amount of work that you're doing without us even understanding that all of that work is going on. So we get information, but you help us understand all the things you're doing for us. And so I think it's a win-win to have those regularly scheduled.
Sounds good. We'll make it happen. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Almost exactly on time. Are there any other questions or input from, yes, Dewan?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I just have a quick questions in regards to like the efficiency of the office and how funding can help that. Did you go over like, I think on the second slide, it was one of the goals was, I'm sorry that I just have to jump back to it. So prepare legal supportable legislation. How can we improve the time span within when we request legislation to when it's given to us in a draft form? Do you think that may be in line with the goal that you had on the last slide, which was bringing in that 5th attorney, or is that a completely different staff?
Yeah, it's probably a different staff person. Here's what we have right now, but it doesn't I can have staff do a couple things. One, if I bring on a new attorney, I can have that person totally dedicated to Jacqueline. Right now, we get changes for legislation daily, and they are numerous. And we only have one person doing the lion's share of that drafting, although the attorneys, myself included, have to research the law in order to make the draft legally viable. And so there are 2 or 3 parts. And we have to work out with city clerk staff, timing, agendizing the pieces of legislation. So there are a lot of moving parts. And often when we get the legislation with our new my management software, I put the legislation on a track depending on what I've been told as the level of importance. So usually we like to get legislation drafted within 2 weeks to 4 weeks. And that's kind of the track that helps us make sure that we can get everything done. Additionally, in that time, we try to make sure that if there's going to be a staff report or some other kind of agency input on the legislation, that we can provide that as well to our team here so that we can draft and the wording and everything all makes sense, as well as we have to review the entire code, because sometimes we change parts of the code not remembering that it affects 5 other parts of the code. And we have run into that several times, and we've had to scrap something that we drafted because there was no definitional section, right? So we used a term that we didn't define, or we used a term that was defined in 3 different places differently in each place. And we've also taken on the responsibility of trying to meet with, as we've done with yourself, meet with council members to hear exactly what you want so that we can draft it right the first time. And again, 2 weeks to 4 weeks is right now kind of what I'm working with to respond. And I think given the number of legislative requests we get, we think that's an improvement on the past, and we think it's reasonable given the fact that we do want to be right when we come out of the box the first time.
So what, just my last question, what support staff do you plan to bring in to help the increase of attorneys, because if you guys are now taking on the lion's share of the work without contracting that out, I mean, there has to be an increase in staff to help with the efficiency, correct?
Yes, and that's why we're looking at, as I reviewed staff, I think a junior attorney or certified paralegal would help us with the volume of some of the work that's kind of redundant, that right now we don't have someone particularly situated to handle the volume of some of these matters. However, we do think now that we have the experience level to do the work, but we may not have the hands to do it, especially because our attorneys in our office, we do a little bit of everything. And I've moved away from trying to have one attorney just do one thing and one attorney just do another thing. All of our attorneys are situated to do anything and everything that's required. And that what happens when we do that is they get pulled in 5 different directions at one time. And so having another hand to do some of the mundane kind of repetitive work related to the litigation, municipal infractions, and maybe collections in the future would be helpful.
I lied. I know I said that was my last question. All right, this is my last one. Are you open to bringing in, and I know we talked about this maybe in the mayor's budget, but potentially bringing in like interns over the course of the summer or even during the academic school year to kind of, one, give that firsthand experience that is necessary when you want to get into like a career in law, but also just to assist in any way possible on a much smaller pay scale, potentially even what is it called when they give you a stipend? Sorry.
Yes, and we had that in the budget, but I took it out because we were all asked to do a 10% decrease in our request. So I had originally put in money for summer interns, law clerks, with a stipend and some kind of minimum wage over the course of the summer. And I removed it out of my request because of the COVID impact on the city.
All right. So I have one closing request, and that is if you would not mind giving us a slide with your 22 through 25 goals that are in the performance measurement book, that because this is going on to the council members, and I think they need to see that in addition to the slides you have, which might need some sort of relabeling to reflect that it's enhancements or exact. I don't know exactly how you want to do it, but
sure. Okay.
I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Are there any closing?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, sorry, I can't get my video going right now, but I had a question. And sorry I'm tuning in late. I look forward to viewing what I missed. But
Whoop.
please correct me if it's already been gone through for the office.
Can't hear you. We lost you there.
You're very melodious, Rob, but your audio is breaking up.
Okay, sorry. My question has to do, basically echoing what Dwan, Alderman Gay had to say is, I want to thank you for all the work you've been doing. I just want to echo the importance of supporting the council, and I'm not sure if there are any performance measures that are related to supporting the council and getting legislation drafted and reviewed and that kind of thing. I think that's really important. And I also think that'll help to echo what the chair has said. I'm not so concerned about rehauling the code. I think that'll come as a product of supporting the council. So that's all I wanted to point out.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. And I'm glad you joined us. And in fact, want to note in passing, I really appreciate all of the participation of the council members. I think it benefits both our process, but I think also heads off some of the need to redo things when we get to the council writ large. Fred, you have your finger up.
Oh, yes. And it wasn't my middle finger, I promise.
Yeah, okay.
I really like the way the presentation went. I think if Karen helped put this together, she's to be commended. I think the very small difference in the final numbers probably are explained by, maybe this was done a month ago or some time ago, and the numbers change ever so slightly over a period of time. And to me, $10,000 on almost $1.5 million budget isn't really any big deal. And thank you for putting this together. Good job, everybody involved.
Fred, did we mention that difference is coming out of your salary?
It probably couldn't, because there wouldn't be anything left. But
Mr. City Attorney, you wanted to say something in closing?
Yeah, I just because you talked about the page 8 long-term goals coinciding with the performance measures.
Yes.
The performance measures only relate to the next year's budget. The long-term goals are outside of that budget. And if you look at page 4 and 5, the goals and the objectives and benchmarks are all there relating to the performance measures, because that's where I took this material on page 4 and 5.
Au contraire, if you look at the document that we received from the administration with the performance measures, there are goals, objective, benchmarks, and then there is a final set of pages which have fiscal 22 through 25 long-term goals.
Okay.
And
I never saw that. I never saw that. Okay.
Okay. Well, gee, I would have hoped they'd come from you, but when you look at that, there's goals 1 through 6, and they are different than the goals that are in your PowerPoint slide. You know, I don't have a problem with both slides. I think each of them convey information, but I don't want council members to confuse goals that are enhancements. Both are aspirational, but one includes enhancements, and the other is something that's part of this whole performance measurement process. So
Sure, we'll get it right.
yeah, I know we will. We're all working together here. This is a good process. Duan, you said you had one more question.
Because I don't have the sheet that you have, so I'm just wondering where you're looking at right now.
Everyone was given a set of documents that have come before the Rules Committee, which is a statement from each of the departmental components that has fiscal 2021 goals, objective benchmarks, and performance measures, and every department.
Is that in this binder, or is that something that we were sent?
That is a separate document. It was to be part of the presentation made by each of the departments. The Finance Committee had asked the presenters to follow that as part of their guideline.
Would you forward that to me if possible?
Pardon me?
Would you forward it to me if possible?
I would ask someone, I think Lynn Farrow is the one that can forward it to you. And in fact, I think we all need to get a redo of it because some things have changed since we received it and it went before rules. So I guess City Manager Gerald, is that something?
We will. We will send that to all the council members.
Thank you.
May I ask Ross, are we talking pages 43 through 50 something in our books? We do have them by department. I'm looking now for law.
I don't think it's on page 43, but I'm trying to find. Law is on page 72 in the budget binder.
I'm looking at your performance measures.
What page are you on?
40, starts on page 43. I believe.
Yeah, right.
Yours is on 52.
Yes. Yes.
I didn't understand what Jody said.
Page 52 is where you'll find the Office of Law's performance measures.
Okay. So Dewan, Alderman Gay, it's in your book, in your budget book.
Well, but does it have?
What's not included is the long-term goals in here. So
right.
We'll send the full package. I just got a message from Lynn. She's on it. She'll send it to everybody.
And when we get the new package, is it okay if we throw this old one out and replace it? That'll be the sole new one. We won't have to go back to this one, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you're at liberty to do what you need to do. I'm not sure. I never throw anything away, but that's up to you. All right. Are we ready to finish with law and move on to finance?
I will remind the members of the committee that these performance measures, along with the long-term goals, I believe, were passed by resolution. So they are available if you want to look for them in the council resolutions.
Actually, Jody, they haven't been passed. They're still with rules. They haven't moved back to the council yet for.
Okay. So the update one is not done. Okay.
And rules, I assume, will have to deal with the new document with the additional columns added.
That would be my request, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So Takia, would you put that on our list, please, for rules?
At long last, are we ready to go back to yesterday's agenda where you will find
Thank you all.
materials? Yes, again, thank you, Mr. City Attorney. Appreciate the time and look forward to those additional pieces of information you were going to give us that sort of in the form of footnotes. But your
Thank you.
presentation was very informative. All right. Finance Director, at long last, you're on.
Okay, so hopefully they have my presentation there. Put the slides up. Okay, thank you. All right, so the finance department, as you know, I've been here not even 2 years yet. We've accomplished a lot in those 2 years, but we've been dealing with staff turnover that happened early on, and we're filling and backfilling and backfilling, and we're getting close now to having full staff, and so that's kind of hindered some of our progress during these last 2 years. Plus, I think there's a void that we need to fill, but I'll talk about that when I discuss my enhancements later. So if you can go to the first slide. No, go back. There you go. All right, so here's where I've listed what I feel are the 9 functions of the finance department. We do accounting and financial reporting. We do the budgetary reporting and monitoring of the budget. We take care of billings and collections, which includes not only utilities, but the CFAs and the miscellaneous billing and the personal property tax billing. We do the cash and investment management. We take care of office operations, which includes both the functioning of the office and the supervision of payroll and disbursements. We take care of debt issuance and management. And we have a grants accounting and reporting, which is done by one person, and that's working out well. We have the function of risk management, which is trying to make sure that we have a safe working environment, and purchasing. Next slide. I've got one slide that's dedicated to each of these functions, and where I try to get the goals and the objectives all on one slide. As we go, I will talk about the performance measures, which I did not include on the slide because it would get pretty busy. In accounting and reporting, the goals are to maintain our timely and accurate accounting records and to strengthen, maintain, and monitor internal controls. In my performance measures, I listed 3 objectives for this goal. 1, for accurate accounting records. We need a reconciliation calendar. We need to make sure that accounts are being reconciled on a regular basis and the reconciliations are timely. And that has been challenged, of course, not only when I came on board, but the last couple of years because of the low staff levels. So our benchmark here is to have 100% of our reconciliations done and all of our analyses done and meeting the deadlines that we have set. We're getting there, we're better. Like I said, as we staff up and these duties are passed along to the person who's responsible for them, we are getting better at meeting the deadlines. Another objective is to standardize the fund accounting in Munis, including capital project accounts. When I came on board, once I got to know how Munis worked, I found that although the transactions are being recorded in the system, many, especially the capital project accounts, were not being consistently recorded in the same way. Meaning, for instance, revenues were not being posted directly to the projects, they were being posted just into the fund. So right now, Katie and I and Nikki, who took Katie's place when she moved into the budget role, are working on getting the capital project accounts updated so that when we run reports for a capital project, you can see what the expenses are, but you can also see what the revenues are that we've matched against that project. Of course, our benchmark here is to match the budget in Munis to the adopted budget and recognize all revenue sources within the capital projects. The third objective in accounting and financial reporting, we need to conduct risk assessments and audits. And I know I've talked about this on many occasions. The time for me has just not been there to get out and do this. This is something that I do think is critical. And I wish I had time to go do site visits and then come out with a risk assessment and all the internal control improvements they need to make at these places. What has helped is the audit committee's role in establishing audits of some of these departments, which is alleviating some of this load from my schedule. And you know, we're almost done with this Rec and Parks audit, with highlighted a few things that needed to be improved there. We are finishing that up, and I will work with Director Trader and his staff to see what they can implement from those recommendations.
I think we have a question from Fred.
Yeah, I can't see all the people, so I don't know if that's a function of what I'm doing or.
I think
me neither. As much as I would enjoy seeing you, Jody, I can't at the moment.
Yeah,
but
I think there's at the top of your screen, there's a view options thing that you can pull down.
Well, I can only get 4 at a time.
Yeah, request. Even 4 at a time would be good.
If you go to the top, you see those little boxes.
I can see people, but the tile or the thing is okay. I got it. So maybe.
All right. What do you need to be able to conduct these risk assessments? I mean, to me, that is a key function of your office. Right. And I know that it kind of drives people on the audit committee crazy that that isn't a number one. Well, I'm not going to say it's not a number one priority, but they're looking, going, why are we doing an audit when we don't even have a risk assessment of these different departments?
A risk assessment would probably fill the same role, is to identify what could go wrong there and try to fix these things so that audits wouldn't be necessary. The key element here is time, and I will talk about this later. As of right now, I'm filling 2 roles here. I'm filling a finance director role and the assistant finance director role. I take care of a lot of the day-to-day operational items, and that takes up a lot of my time. And I can tell you that as I sit here during the day on these meetings, people are coming in my office and putting things in my inbox all day long. Things that I have to go approve, review, sign off on, and those daily things take up a significant chunk of my time. And just things like the 2 major projects that we have going on here during the year. Half the year is budget, the other half of the year is pulling together a financial statement. Those are taking up a lot of my time too. I'm the only one here that's ever pulled together the CAFR on my own. I did that in my other jobs. And so I've taken that on myself, which takes a lot of time. The budget book is being put together by me and Katie. And as you know, we had some help this year with the transition, but next year it'll just be Katie and I again. And that takes up a significant amount of our time. So with all those day-to-day regular tasks we have to do, trying to set aside time to get out and do this, which I agree is critical, it's just, there's just not enough hours in the day for me to do this.
Well, nobody questions that you work very, very hard. No doubt about it. But my question, I guess, was referring to whether, I mean, do you still need help? Yes. Even with a full roster? There seems like there ought to be somebody that can be conducting this sort of thing.
As it is right now, there is no position that can take over that role right now. I feel like as I'm here and as I learn what's being done and not being done, I find where the voids are. And right now, I think as long as we're fully staffed and those other positions are full, there's one more role. I'm doing 2 different things, and that's where things are falling apart. And so I will talk about that later.
Is this where Mary was? We did have a risk management person on board.
No, we have a risk management person. We're fine there. We've hired a really good risk manager. His name is Corey, and he's doing a great job. Finally, we ran it a few times. We got it upgraded, We finally got a fantastic person in that role, and he's doing a really good job. So that's one thing that's not lacking anymore.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is that you really need a deputy you.
I need a deputy.
Right.
And the deputy would function like an accounting manager that can take care of the accounting end of things and the financial reporting end of things. And then I can focus on the very high level things like policies, procedures, risk assessments, and guide the daily activities of the staff better. I feel like there are a lot of efficiencies that could be gained here if somebody had the time to sit with each staff person and see, okay, what are you doing? How can you do that better? Maybe you could do it this way and that will be faster. Maybe we don't have to do that as often. Maybe we can tie the systems together. Those things take a lot of high level analysis to try to figure out where we can cut time on other tasks. And
Well, that's my original question. I mean, do you need help? That's what.
yes, and I will get to that at the end because I had it in my enhancements this year, but I can tell you that it's not going to get there.
And I would remind Finance Committee members and other council members, this request is not new to Jody. We heard it from Bruce. I heard it from Tim Elliott. I think it's a constant strain as the city manager tries to balance filling all the objectives. And but I would say this isn't a new song that we've heard. We've heard it over and over again.
Yeah. So and since we're on the topic, then I'll add that there was a deputy here. Melissa filled the role as a deputy. But as I came on board and she left shortly afterwards, I realized I took on her duties, and I quickly realized that not only Melissa but Nikki was doing at least 2 jobs apiece. They had tons of stuff they were working on. They had a long list of to-do items that never got done. And like I said, the accounting system had never been fully implemented to properly reflect all of the transactions and balances, and things were falling through the cracks because there's just too many things for them to do. The city is a very complex city for its size. We have a lot of issues here. We have federal, state presence. 20% of our land is non-taxable. So we have those, we have visitors, we have the tourism issue. And with all that, we have a lot of complexity. We have a lot of programs that we have to implement. When we have a loan program or a tax credit program, this office has to implement it. And I only have a total of 19 people. That includes me and all the accountants and all the billings and collections staff. So that's not a very large staff for such a complex operation. And I have found that the admin branches here are very thinly staffed for as complex as the city operations are. And we try to keep going and try to do the first priorities first, and we'll just have to manage because, like I said, next year's going to be a tough year, and I don't know that that's a year you want to try adding a much needed role. So,
Well, maybe restructuring is it can be done that way instead of hiring somebody new. But at any rate, we're well aware of the problem.
Yes, you can
Obviously
restructure, but you also have to have the skill level on board. The knowledge and the skill level to take over the operations, because it took a long time for me to get where I am. And right now, as far as putting together a comprehensive financial report, et cetera, I'm the only one here who's ever done that from front to back. So there's that knowledge and skills too that need to be there.
Thank you.
So we can move on to the next slide, or we'll never get through it. So the next role that I have noted here is the budgetary reporting and monitoring. We want to provide accurate and timely financial information to the city departments and other stakeholders and improve the reporting capability of Munis. We want, one of our objectives is to give quarterly internal development of budgetary complex, including capital projects. And like I said, we're not quite there yet on the capital projects, but we have been doing the quarterly budget reports that you have seen this fiscal year. And we're working on the third quarter report right now, disseminating it not only to the council and the committees, but also to the departments and help them track how they're doing compared to their budget. So our goal, our benchmark here is to get these reports to departments by the 15th of the following month. We're not quite there yet, but we're doing pretty good. We're getting it to them pretty much within the next month. The first one was a little difficult because we had to work out some wrinkles, but now we're close. The second objective is to develop, maintain, and evaluate long-term financial projections for you, for the audit committee, and financial advisory commission. Everybody's asking for them. We need to do them on a regular basis, and that's another role that the finance director should fill in maintaining and keeping up at least 5-year projections. Right now, with what's going on, I think it's more critical to have a 2 or 3 year projection to try to see where we're at and do what if scenarios, and then have plans to address those what if scenarios. But until that was going to be my next to do item as soon as I roll off these finance committee sessions. So that's the next thing. I hope to put together the first long-term financial projections that I've seen here. And again, the benchmark that we work for eventually is to have that done regularly on a quarterly basis.
So we look forward to that. I agree with you. It's critical. We need to know where we're going to understand where we are right now. So I know we haven't had the time or resources to do it, but I think this year in particular, with such uncertainty facing us, it's going to be a speculative process. When I worked for the Office of the Actuary, we used to do 75-year projections, and they had a confidence interval which spread way out. And I think our confidence interval on any projection for this coming few years is going to be wide, but at least we need to be mindful of what that would be.
Yes. I mean, like I said, what if scenarios are critical? Like, what if it turns out that we lose this much revenue? What if it turns out that this happens, but this doesn't happen? Those kind of things. So the last objective I'll talk about here is an important one. I want to implement this OpenGov software. We have been working at it. We have weekly calls with them. And again, the issue is it's Katie and I and a person from IT and occasionally a person from HR when we're dealing with HR issues. And having that little staff, if you get tied up on another project like budget, these things get slowed down. In addition, we found some aspects of OpenGov that don't coordinate well with our system, and it's going to cause some hiccups in the process, and we've had to kind of go backwards and redo things. So
can I ask a question on that? Because I've obviously been a big fan of open government for a long time, but I'm wondering, is open government in competition with my desire for more line item information? Are they at cross purposes?
I don't think they're at cross purposes. I think ideally, when we get this software completely implemented, that might be a good software package to provide you line item detail that's easier to read. Because right now, the problem with Munis is when you print it from the system, you see what the account descriptions look like. Right. We can change those in OpenGov. We can't readily change them in Munis, and we can't make it look a lot better for Munis. So as far as reporting what's there, I think that would be a good tool. We've got the human resources, the workforce planning module, maybe 80% implemented. We had some hiccups with that when we were using it, but we did use its product for this budget process, which was much better than last year. We are also working on the budget book module, so it can create a budget book for us. And we hit a couple snakes there this year that we've had to iron out, that we give them our information, but it doesn't kick out the same stuff we see. So you have to iron those out. And like I said, it takes staff time to devote into figuring why it's not working.
All right, well, thank you. I'm glad to hear, because I realize I'm the source of a lot of requests for services, and I didn't want to be requesting things that were cross-purpose. I do hope we get time to finally fulfill open government.
Well, now that I have a dedicated budget person in Katie, that will happen faster than it was before because we didn't have a dedicated budget person before last year. And I thank you for adding that to my budget for FY20 because it's helped out a lot. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
It will definitely be done, Alderman Arnett, because I want it finished as well.
Yeah. We got more modules too. We have a lot of these transparent government modules that will help other users go on and see what's in our budget. And those are the very visible ones. And those are the ones I'm anxious to see what they look like when we're done. But first we got to build the base. We got to get the base information in there correctly so that it comes out showing the users, the citizens, and who else wants to go on the website and use it. It shows them the right information. Okay, let's say somebody switch. Okay, so this is the next function, our billings and collection function, very important function here. We need to provide accurate and timely billings for utility, CFA, and general billings. And general billings includes anything. Yes, there's a question.
Please finish the slide. I'll wait till after.
Oh, okay, okay. So our objectives, one is to standardize and consistently apply payment and adjustment policies. We need some updates to the city code provisions to standardize utility adjustments and penalties. We have a lot of pushback from the citizens and that we have implemented a policy that we only have a once in a lifetime adjustment on your water bill if you have an unusual leak in your system and it's not the city's property, then you only get a once in a lifetime adjustment. And to me, that's very restrictive. And I would like to clarify that more. We get a lot of pushback because people have ongoing problems and they want to be able to get some kind of a discount on when they have water usage, but that, for instance, when they're watering their lawns and it's not going into the sewer system, they're getting charged for sewer on that. So there's other ways we can establish the policy. I'm not sure how this policy got changed, but I understand that you had more of a different type of policy before this was put in place. So I want to review other kinds of policies regarding adjustments and penalties.
Thank you for recognizing that.
No, it is very restrictive, and I don't have the authority to waive anybody's penalty fees. I don't have that authority, so I avoid it unless I think we were at fault. Clearly, we don't waive penalties, which can be a hardship as well. So,
Duan, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just chipping in around on that same note. Jody, you remember a couple of weeks ago when we had that incident and a resident requested that we allow them to pay online or get notices online and update the system so that it can be more efficient. Would that fall under this?
It will, and it's also a component of finding efficiencies in our office operations. So what he's referring to is getting email invoices, and our Munis system has a function on it that in this billing, you can turn on this email notifications. You can do invoices by email. That saves us from having to mail it, and it saves the customer from having to keep that paper trail. And we have that function, but again, that's IT has to have the time and the staff to be able to turn that on. Then we have to test it. And how much testing is required depends on what we're doing, but it requires testing and careful analysis of what's coming out to make sure it looks like what we want it to look like. So with only one person in IT that's dedicated to help us with our Munis products and all the timekeeping products and anything associated with our Munis system on any function, that's one person. We have Carrie Kramer. And I know that they're going to try to add another analyst, which is going to help us immensely, having another resource there. But we have to wait for her time. And right now she's doing two other things. So, that's one of those things. And maybe it's easy and maybe it can be easily implemented. And we're going to try it because it's a great idea. It'll save us paper. It'll save us postage. And it may service the cost of the company that's actually stuffing our bills now and sending them out. So we got to try to get paperless.
So if I can interject here, and I think this is a parking lot issue for the Finance Committee, but I've never really understood why Munis is done out of IT as opposed to being done out of finance.
Well,
there may be a rationale, but it does seem inefficient.
So anytime we have the Munis system has to be has to involve an analyst that's familiar with how the data looks on the underside, and those skills are in the IT department. They deal not only with Munis from an accounting standpoint, but there's the purchase order stuff, there's HR timekeeping things that we need to do, and everything there, you have to have an analyst who understands the data behind the scenes. How does Munis work from a very elementary basis? How does it work behind the scenes? What tables are you accessing? What happens when you do this? What did you just do to the data? And that's payroll, that's disbursements, that's purchase orders, that's timekeeping. There's a lot of elements there, and we definitely need somebody with that skill set to be dedicated to help us implement these modules. And we have a lot of modules that we're not using yet.
So I understand everything you said, but all that you ticked off there sound very much like finance issues. And I don't question that there isn't a capability required, but I've always questioned this crosswalk back and forth between IT. I know every once in a while we'll see something from IT that Munis is down for this period of time or the weekend. I just question if there isn't enough demand from finance alone for a finance staff to be IT proficient for Munis.
The current analyst is fairly dedicated to our needs. I wouldn't know enough about the work she's doing to know if she's doing her job properly. That's not my skill set. It would have to be managed from the IT department. She is fairly dedicated to our processes, but it involves timekeeping. So I know she did a timekeeping system with police. I know she's worked on something from fire, and now she's working on another timekeeping system and pulling her in different directions. And I happen to know she works tremendous number of hours. I mean, we're going to burn her out if they don't get help on that aspect. I mean, she's just working a lot of hours, and she tries to keep up. And just in my experience, she's really good at setting priorities. But there's just not enough hours, and she's really working too much.
So I'll get to you in a second, Dewan. Sheila, I'm surprised your mute isn't off, but I do think this is a parking lot issue for the Finance Committee. It does not make sense for us to burn out staff. That is unwise in the long run. I'm not arguing for an enhancement because I know Director Gerald would be very upset, but
if I could just, before we leave this discussion, so we already have a position that's going to be filled. It's the one that Brian used to be in, I think.
There's two positions.
We have a position, so we're going to hire another analyst.
It's set up that way now.
Process.
So as long as they can get it filled and get a good person, they have two positions they're going to be filling, and one is an analyst, and I'm very glad, and I'm looking forward to that additional resource. So there's nothing you need to do to this budget to change it. We just have to move forward with filling the vacant positions there.
All right, I'm glad to hear that. Dewan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, my question was in regards to, as she was mentioning, like burning out staff and stuff like that. And I don't want to step on anybody's toes every time I mention salaries. I know it's touchy, but is there a point where we start to, I know Michael was just talking about it, and you talked about it too, Jody, that sometimes you want to hire more for experience so they can take on multiple tasks. But with the experience comes an increase in salary. I mean, when you look at it, it's like 150, 160, whatever, just all of these. Is there a point where we look at, hiring additional support staff, as I just was talking about with the law, so that, the offices can run smoothly, so that you aren't requiring the people at the top to do 18 things and administrative duties. And it just seems as if we're, doing one project at a time, and which I guess can be, it has worked thus far, but I feel like we could be a little.
I would say that some of them would say it hasn't worked thus far because we have things that are on the back burner that shouldn't be on the back burner, like the risk assessments and stuff like that. That stuff should be critical. And finding the time to do those critical higher level things means you have to have some capacity in your staffing level to take on some of the day-to-day stuff. So
So when we look at, because I missed, like I was, I don't know, like 8 the last recession. So I missed all of the cuts to staffing and how they reorganize things. But if we feel maybe running into, an economic downfall over the course of the next 2 years, and we're looking at upper or higher level staff, at some point, do you start to look at salaries and try to balance that out based off of how much support that individual needs over the course of the years, and how you balance out those salaries so that we can stay afloat during like an economic recession?
So I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, I don't know if you're talking about whether salaries go down when the market determines the market, and what the market will pay for the people with the skills we need is what will determine what we have to pay for somebody to do what we need.
I guess.
Duan, if I can interject, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I think those are topics for the Finance Committee and then the council to discuss. We have to realize that we have a budget constraint, but those are exactly the policy kinds of issues. They're almost more philosophical issues that do belong at the council level. I hope you will be able to join us when we go into Finance Committee deliberations, because that is, we don't have the ability to second guess what finance or any of the departments are doing, even though sometimes we try to do that. But these are policy, philosophical, reasonable person kinds of things that I believe we're elected to do. And I want you to hold that thought, because we do have to come back. But I will say, before the city manager Gerald jumps on me, we have to realize we have a budget constraint, and we're going to have to allocate across. Every department can make very compelling arguments about what they need to do better. And we always are beguiled by those arguments, but we also have a budget constraint and taxpayers who are not so enamored with these things. I think largely because they don't understand what they're getting, but still, so it's up to us. We are elected to find that right balance. And so please hold that thought. And Director Gerald, please.
Yeah, and I just wanted to weigh in. So we try to deal with these as best we can, and I'll cite a couple of examples of that recently. So the one that we just talked about in IT, where Carrie Kramer desperately needs assistance, we're changing the classification of a position from one that's already in the city to another one that's already in the city, so that we can hire another analyst. And you'll also recall the discussion of a senior buyer and purchasing. That was the same type of situation where we were so understaffed there, and we needed a higher level of expertise. We needed somebody to back up Brian Snyder more. So we brought that one forward. So we tried to deal with these. We have a common problem across a lot of departments with this, but the ones that are really extreme, like those two specific ones, we try to find a way to make it work so we can get more assistance for those folks that are just so overworked.
Thank you, City Manager. Sheila?
Yeah, I'm looking on page 86 in the book at the staffing. And 2 questions. David, you just mentioned the senior buyer. We changed the grade on that. Did we change it to 13, or did we change it to something higher? I don't recall.
13.
13.
So this is okay. I'm looking at the buyer, which is the last item, and it says for 2020 we had 2, but in 21 we have 1.
Oh,
and the numbers don't add up.
We reclassified one of the buyer positions to a senior buyer, so the number of buyers would drop by 1, and the number of senior buyers should be.
So what I think she's pointing to is if you add up those amounts, they shouldn't both go to 22 because that last line item in the table is 2. So we do have the same number of positions. So I think there's a confusion of those last 2 lines. There should be 1 position less from.
Yeah, I think for 20, the 813 should be 0.
Yeah, you're right. The 20 column has an extra position in there, and that does not add to 22.
Right.
So we're not losing a position. That's my.
No. It's straight. I've got 22 positions overall with purchasing and finance together.
And I see Brian Steiner standing by, but let's just throw in right here. One of the reasons why we need to upgrade some of these positions is we do need to be doing some continuity planning. And so it is good to have some higher level people who will be able to fill in as we have people retire. So over and above just needing the higher level of expertise, we do need to plan that there are going to be out years where people are going to need to be replaced. And so I'm sure Brian will talk about that when he has a chance to talk to us.
He's going to come on and help us with the purchasing part at the end. Was there any other questions? I was going to do this last objective. We want to provide the residents with timely, consistent, well-informed, and cordial service. And one of the benchmarks there is to try to account for and decrease the number of customer complaints. I think that's going to get better. I'm not sure how we count customer complaints because sometimes they call, they're upset, and then we're able to help them, which do you call that a complaint or not? But we have relatively new staff over there. If you remember, we have hired, there's 5 people on that side and 3 of them are brand new. I say brand new. They've been here a couple months. So they're learning and they're doing really well. And I'm very happy with the staff we have over there now. So it's just a matter of getting everybody fully trained and able to do their job and very quickly and efficiently. So we can go to the next slide.
While we're doing that, let me ask a question of Takia or Julian. We're clearly going to run over. We don't have an afternoon session. Do we have a time constraint as far as Zoom? Can we go like for another half hour?
No, you're fine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so the next function of my department is cash and investment management. Our goal is to protect city deposits and maximize the related earnings. One of the objectives is we have to maintain collateral balances. We have an agreement with our main bank, Wells Fargo, that they set aside collateral that would back up our cash balances if necessary, and they are doing that. But occasionally, they're required to keep enough collateral to cover our deposits at 102% of the balance. But occasionally, because of big deposits coming in suddenly, that collateral falls below 102%. So we want to establish a monthly review of collateral balances to make sure that Wells Fargo is doing their job. And that's something we have not done yet, and I intend to give it to my cash accountant that's right now doing her job, but also doing part of her old job too. So she's still helping with reconciliation. So eventually we'll get there. The next objective is to maintain responsible and efficient banking relationships. We have a good relationship with Wells Fargo. I'm very happy with them. We have a couple other banks that we do business with. And eventually we need to get an RFP on the street for banking services because you have to evaluate those occasionally and making sure you're getting the best deal. And then consider when we're doing that, if we need to couple merchant card services and other services on with that same contract or bid them separately, because we can bid them separately and we might get better deals by going with breaking up the services. We want to reduce the number of bank accounts, and our benchmark there is to close any unnecessary accounts. I've said this on occasion. We have way too many bank accounts. A lot of them deal with the old bond proceeds. Every time you sell bonds, those cash has to go in a separate account. And as we were piling up the bond proceeds and not spending them, we have dozens of accounts related to those bond proceeds. And our goal has been to spend that down, to pull that cash into our coffers out of those accounts. That helps us earn interest. And we can then close a bank account, and we then save ourselves the service charges on that account, because there's a couple $1,000s of service charges for each account every year. So you got a hand up.
Would you be open to, I don't know how this works and how complicated the process is, but be open to switching to a bank that is nice to the working class families in our city? Wells Fargo does not have a good reputation.
So when we do an RFP, we put it on the street for all of our banking services, and we would set the criteria that would determine what we're going to use as our judgment points on who's the better bank. And not all of that is cost basis. Some of that is qualitative. And if there are qualitative factors like that that we need to consider, we would do that when we're developing the RFP. For instance, what is their ranking? What is their customer service ranking? That kind of thing.
Is that done like yearly, or is it like on a?
No. It's very time consuming to change banks. We've had Wells Fargo for many years, and I've continued them as I've been here, and I would like to do an RFP, even though to us, we've had a very good relationship with them for our purposes. But we do occasionally, every few years, need to go out and rebid that. It's a very time consuming conversion. When you move from one bank to another, there's a lot of work involved. And it's not something that I'm ready to take on right now. But when we do, we can put those qualitative factors in there. And that I will work with Brian Snyder and myself, and if we need to get a group involved to talk about what's important and how to evaluate the responses that come in. Okay. All right. We can go to the next slide. All right. So one of our functions, the office operations, which includes our accounts payable and our payroll functions. Our goal is to improve the efficiency of finance office operations, of course, and that saves money, that saves time. We want to be able to update and implement financial policies and procedures and a related manual, and introduce any needed legislative changes. The benchmarks for that would be to update and disseminate the manual. We have a lot of policies in place that were established by my predecessor and prior. I haven't had the chance to sit and review those to see if I want to alter any of them. We may be able to find some efficiencies there if, for instance, they're geared to another time when there wasn't as much automation. We also are going to have to determine if any of the changes we would want to make need legislative changes, like our policies, our legislation, our code language doesn't give us the right authority to do what we would want to do with our policies. We want to be able to maintain accurate and timely payroll processes and reporting. And my benchmark here, and this is something I noticed right up front, we want to reduce the number of payroll adjustment reissues. During our payroll processes, since I've been here, there have been a few errors that have slipped through, which require an enormous amount of time for us to reissue checks, reissue groups of checks, callback files. You know, we had a W-2 issue last year where we had to issue new W-2s because the coding was wrong. Those sort of things are a function of two things. One, us here, while we're processing, something can slip through the cracks and it causes the file to be bad. Or timekeepers out in the departments entering the wrong time, which caused somebody to either get paid short or paid over. We've had both situations happen. And it, like I said, with very few staff working on the payroll function, Carrie from IT is involved heavily when we're trying to remedy something like that, to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. And I have one payroll clerk here and a supervisor. And the new payroll clerk is in training, so her supervisor is helping train her on those functions. So it's a time-consuming job, and any mistake, as you know, is quite critical. And we, for the second objective, we want to maintain accurate and timely payroll processes and reporting. We are moving some of our tail end payroll processes to ADP. And we've talked about this and we announced it a while back. We were going to go live on April 1, but we couldn't make that deadline. So we're July 1. We're working with ADP so that we send them the final payroll file and they do the direct deposits. They will, anybody who doesn't want a direct deposit can get a pay card and put their cash, their paycheck on a pay card, or get a direct deposit. And they're also going to do the tax filings for us, not only the quarterly 941s, but they're going to do the W-2s at year end for us. And that'll take a big load off our staff, and that will reduce the amount of paper that's going through here. Right now we're printing for some of our people, they want manual checks. We're printing manual checks and putting them in envelopes and putting postage on it, that kind of thing. And that's the busy work that when you have such a small staff, you don't have the time to stuff 60, 70, 80 manual checks in a payroll period. It just takes a couple extra hours, and that's something we don't have. And we're trying to reduce paper. And I think this change to ADP, it's a fairly inexpensive service, which is why we did it. It's only a few $1,000s a year, and it's worth it because I think we're going to save at least that much in the paper, envelopes, postage that we do, besides saving us a lot of time. The third objective here is increasing our office efficiency. I've talked about some of these things, the first benchmark being reducing the cost of operations with paperless systems, and that goes to this ADP change. On the AP side, we're going to start implementing using ACH instead of paychecks. We're probably, not paychecks, I should say, manual checks to vendors. We're probably one of the last operations to still do all of our payments to vendors with physical checks. So we need to try to go paperless there, get people to give us ACH information so that we can send it directly to their bank accounts and pay them that way. We have the capability again. It's a function that we have to turn on and test again. It's one of those combination munis, banking, and accounting functions that we need to test very thoroughly before we try to put it into place. And I think I've addressed that second benchmark there as well. So we can move on to the next slide. Is there any questions at this point?
Not a question, but a quick observation. Again, and I'm going to thank the city manager and all of the departments. We haven't really had a thorough update of all the things that the finance department does and manages. And I'm finding this not only rewarding in getting that, but also I like the sets of objectives and benchmarks you've set for yourself. So I am very appreciative of this presentation. I think it's very good. And I want to thank you. I'll thank you again at the end, but this is pretty good.
All right. So one of the important functions that we do here is debt management. We want to promote the efficient management of city debt. And what that means is minimizing the amount of debt we have. The first objective there is to minimize the amounts borrowed and ensure effective rates. Well, in any bond sale that we've done historically or currently, we mostly do on a competitive basis. So we've got people bidding for our bonds, and that ensures us the most effective rate. But one thing we hadn't been doing is what I call, and I'm kind of borrowing a term here, the just-in-time borrowing, where instead of having a project on the books and immediately selling all the debt related to that project, you figure out what you ask the engineers, how much do you think you're going to be spending over the next year for these projects? And they give you their spending estimates, and then that's the amount of debt you sell. And then you use that up over the course of the year, and then you borrow again based on the projections for the next year's spending. And that, coupled with competitive bidding, is really reducing our debt service costs. We still, besides the last issue that we sold, besides paying off our bands issue that we had out there from 2017, We have not issued any long-term debt for the general city, the city's general fund funded projects. We have been sitting on enough proceeds to keep funding those currently. So we're still trying to get those spent down. I'm sure that in the next 12 months, those are going to be gone and we'll need to sell some debt, short-term or long-term, in the fall. We also, an objective of this debt management is timely reimbursement of capital expenditures. So as we pay bills for capital projects, we cut the check out of our own coffers, and these proceeds that I told you reside in these separate bank accounts, we're supposed to draw them down and reimburse ourselves for those cash expenditures. And that had gotten way behind. When I got here, we were almost 2 years behind in pulling down those proceeds. And that does a couple of things. One, we can't use the investment on those funds to fund our regular operations. Those earnings have to be used for capital projects. As long as they sit in those separate accounts, the investment earnings have to be used for capital projects. So it's not even city general fund interest. And also it uses up the cash that we have sitting here, and it makes our cash margins much narrower. So we have to, as we spend money for capital, we have to get it reimbursed to us out of those accounts. And we are doing that quarterly now. We're getting ready to do another one. We started about a year ago, starting to do this quarterly. It does take time to do, so I can see how it gets behind, because it's a big effort. And we have a lot of accounts out there that we have to tap when we're doing this. So it's quite an analysis, and we're getting caught up with that. And our cash here has our unrestricted cash has increased, and our restricted cash has decreased incredibly over the last couple of years. And then the third objective here is to ensure that we have a active bond compliance checklist. This is a benchmark that I have, that for each bond issue, we have to create a checklist. We have the policy in place, but as far as a visual checklist that makes sure that we're keeping all the records we need to for each bond issue, that I haven't seen yet. And that's something that we haven't done yet. And I'm going to have my debt accountant work on that.
I would ask council members, you don't need to hold up your hand if you want to get in. So Duan, if you have a question, just please ask it, and don't wait for me to recognize you.
So in regards to debt management, would you predict that with all that's going on right now, at some point we may have to take out additional loans or something like that to cover ourselves in the future? And a second question, which kind of may be stupid, but I don't know, I'm learning here. Has there ever been an instance where you had to take out debt to fund salaries? And I'm asking because if we are getting understaffed in some of these departments, and we find that it would be more efficient and more, better for ourselves and for the citizens if we hire staff, would you consider taking out short-term debt to cover those salaries over, so I don't know, like the next?
So from a conceptual standpoint, borrowing money to pay your ongoing expenses is like trying to put your groceries on a credit card. You have to keep buying groceries, so to put them on a credit card and pay them over time, you keep building up that debt. That's only a solution in the most dire circumstances. And I understood the city had done that before, long ago, when there was the downturn, the economic downturn, and they had to open up a couple of lines of credit because they were very, very low on cash. And I don't know what precipitated that particularly. You should be watching your cash stores anyways and be able to predict that. But I know that at the downturn, at the bottom of that economic downturn, all governments were very low on their cash stores.
So just to speak to that quickly, we had to take out, when we had the housing bubble burst, it was not caused by that, but simultaneously, the city had been inappropriately running down its required fund balances. So while we were doing that, all of a sudden this externality hit us, and we had to take out two $10 million lines of credit in order to pay vendors and staff salaries That was at the very beginning of Josh Cohen's administration. And that's why we've been very, very assiduously monitoring, and you'll see some very good pages in the budget binder looking at our fund balances. Ever since then, we've been doing a very good job under a number of administrations, and certainly under the current administration, monitoring those fund balances, because we never want to get into that dire circumstance again. And we'll be talking about that as we get into the deliberation portion of the Finance Committee, and then I presume it'll carry on to the council. I was just talking with City Manager Gerald about this last night. We are actually in very good shape in terms of our fund balances, and I think we're going to need to be there because the next couple of years could be pretty rough. But Jody's correct. We never, ever want to be in that situation again. And those of us who had to live through it don't want to do that.
Okay. And I will add to that today, Alderman Gay. I'm sorry, did somebody else want to say something?
I wanted to jump in.
Hold on, and I'll just say that that's potential. We could do that potentially, Alderman Gay, as a backup in case the revenues in the next year or so really fall short, but we have to carefully consider that and how we would repay that. So you have options as you go into these next couple of years. If things, revenue continues to be very low, we can cut costs, and that would be very drastic because you're talking about your workforce. And then, or we can borrow using that kind of mechanism. There's also that fallback of increasing the tax rate, which would not be, I don't think, a well thought out thing at this point in time. But there's options there, and that is an option, but you have to think about how to pay that back, because it's if you were to borrow, for instance, he said 10 million. If you borrow 10 million on a line, and you've got to figure out how am I going to pay that back, and that's usually a short-term thing where you're trying to get it paid back quickly. So then you have to address the future 2 or 3 years and figure out how you're going to pay that back. So that's something we very carefully consider. It's a possibility. And we don't yet know whether or not we would do something like that for this situation. Is that Alderman Savage that was talking?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, may I jump in?
Yes,
so,
please.
Thank you. Yeah, so just on the point from Alderman Gay, but also the Finance Director, I do agree it's not good practice to borrow to pay for our routine expenses. However, I do want to point out that, we criticized Panelides for doing that with roadways and sidewalks. Yet last year we started down the path of borrowing to pay for our road work and all, as well as our sidewalk, and that's still continued in this budget, which I also want to point out is contrary to one of our adopted financial policies, which I think we need to address at some point during this process.
Oh, hold that thought. I think that's going to come up when we do the Finance Committee deliberations. It seems like every year we go over it, we agonize about it. And so I think it is something that we need to discuss. But Sheila, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just for clarification, when we took at least one of those $10 million loans, it was a tax anticipation note that we took in August, I believe, with the understanding and the expectation that our tax revenue would get to us from the county in September or October. Right. So it wasn't like it was a long-term answer to our problem. We knew the money was coming, but it was all about timing.
The other thing that I don't want to say this to encourage it, but I was astounded at how cheap those two $10 million loans were. We had to pay back the principal, but the interest on it, I'm thinking, gee, I'm going to take one of those out, but not really. But anyway, but it was a time to be avoided, and I think we have policies in place that keep us from that brink. Does someone else wanting to speak?
Does that go into kind of when we the Davenport crew yesterday? They were talking about the 11
Liquidity, yeah.
that we, so when they were describing that and they were saying we could get up to 56 million, and we, I think, had 23 million remaining if we were going off of those lines. So is that our debt cap, 56 million, or was that something completely different?
That's capital. That's on the capital side of things.
Yeah.
Not on the-
Oh, okay.
But yesterday, Mr. Mason did mention having a liquidity line of credit, which is the same thing that we're talking about right now. He did talk about that, but that bar chart with the gap, that's capital related. What capacity do we have to pay debt over time?
Do we get a similar chart like that for these expenses, or is that?
I'm not sure it would be comparable. We would put all of our expenses and all of our revenues into an analysis for the operating side and decide how we would be able to pay that back over time.
Again, with all of these topics, as we get into the deliberations next week, those are certainly things that any alderperson should feel free to raise and us to discuss. I feel those are the kinds of things that are much more in our bailiwick than looking at particular expenditures in a department and questioning it. Not that we don't have the right to do that, but these are more philosophical questions. We get into that every year, and usually we say to ourselves, well, we ought to discuss that in August after the budget's done and we have the time, and then we usually don't. But these are, I believe, the purview of the Finance Committee and the Council, the kinds of issues for us to discuss, and we can do that when we get to that point, but we need to let the director finish her presentation.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is our grants accounting function. We maintain the orgs and the accounting for grant revenue and grant expenditures. We have one accountant that works almost solely on that. She does a really good job. She's developed pretty good relationships with the departments, and I know they're appreciative of having her here. She's been here a little longer than me, I think maybe 2.5 years or so to 3 years, and she's developed her process of reviewing their request for reimbursement and make sure their requests for reimbursements coincide with what she's seeing being spent in the system, so that we make sure those requests are accurate, and when the monies come in, where it's supposed to be posted, et cetera, and where they need their budget.
Who is that we're talking about?
Her name is Neben Hertes. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and while we're on this topic, I think that that's another area where we've made a dramatic improvement. I'd turn to Sheila in particular, but you, Fred, also managing the grants and figuring out where they were and where they were going was always somewhat of a mystery. And looking at the budget binder, particularly pages 31 through 33, I think we have a much better sense of all of that. So that's a dramatic improvement.
Yeah. I have to say, in my experience, the size of this city, we have a lot of grants coming in for the size of this city, and that's a good thing, but then it has its burdens on the record-keeping side. What I'd like to get to here is this objective to conduct quarterly reviews of grant activity and provide feedback. And one of these benchmarks, which I'm sure the grants people in the departments would agree, is that I would love to conduct at least one cross-city training a year with an outside specialist to tell us what we need to be watching out for with our grants, and then an annual internal training to tell them about city policies, because that's one place that we really need to improve on, is standardizing our city policies on how they're supposed to process their paperwork, and then telling them those policies and making sure they're doing it correctly. We can go to the next. Oh,
May I add something very quickly? We did put some procedures in place so that, one, we had to acknowledge in advance of the application that we were aware, and two, that we had to acknowledge receipt of the grants. And that particularly is significant when there's some sort of a match that is required.
Correct. And that is still in place. I just will add that the paperwork that was developed is confusing, and there's different processes. Like, we always want to know in advance when they're applying for something, because if they're applying for something, one, you want to know, is that something the city's interested in getting money for? And two, is there a match required? Are there excessive record keeping requirements that we would never be able to meet? So we want to review that in advance, and that circulates. But then sometimes they receive awards saying, here, we've got some more money for you. Do you want some of this? And they have the award before they've even contemplating applying for something. So sometimes the process gets reversed, and then they're not really sure how do I go through this process? It's already approved. They want to just send us the money. Can I just get the money? And then we have to bog them down with paperwork to just acknowledge that they want to receive extra money. So I'm just trying to find a system whereby we have contemplated every possible scenario and give them clear guidance on what they're supposed to do in those situations. And that I feel is lacking.
May I ask another question? I'm looking at page 87 in the grant book, in our budget books. It has under finance non-allocated community grants, which is very different from what we're talking about.
Correct.
With outside grants. So on what page do we find all of the outside grants? I know there is a page.
So,
3 of them. Pages 31, 32, and 33, I believe.
Well, it's more than that. It's so we start on page 30, and we go in this order: the federal revenues, state revenues, county revenues, and other grant revenues, and then we go through the expenditures, federal expenditures. I mean, these probably could be grouped a little bit better together so that the federals are together. We'll go through the expenditures on page 33 through 35. So if you notice, they're divided by department, departments that are responsible for them with their grant name there. And those are your detail of the appropriations for the grants.
So the bottom line, what is the bottom line? Does that fall on page 30?
It's hold on a second. So on those schedules that list the individual grants, the only subtotals we show are total federal, total state, total county, total other. But if you look at page 29, that summarizes the expenditures for other funds, and the grants fund is broken down there by federal, state, county, and other. So that's the expenditure items coming over here in those categories, which should agree to those detailed schedules that we just talked about.
If you want a grand total of 21 revenues and expenditures, you can go to page 18 for grants.
Thank you, Katie.
So I'm looking for the bottom line.
Okay. So 18.
I would direct you to page 18.
Okay, is that 146 million?
What you want to look at is on page 18, you want to look at the 5th line in that table. Total grants revenue are 6 million. The total grants expenses are 6.3 million. So we would plan to utilize, go ahead. Oh, I thought somebody had a question. We would be utilizing $255,000 of fund balance that's already existing.
What line? We're on page 18.
18 line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down that schedule. It says grants.
Okay.
By fund, total grants revenue, 6,051,000. And if you went to those schedules, the detailed schedules, and you added up federal, state, county, and local, those would add to this number.
So my note that I made to myself, Sheila, on page 18 was, then you go to page 29, and that's where you get the breakout on this the revenue pages. Excuse me.
Bless you.
It's not the virus. And so that's what I was alluding to when I made my comment earlier. It is, you have to know how to follow it, but I think we have a much more rigorous accounting for where the grants are coming from and where they're going to than we'd had in the past. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, and there may be some bridging information, I'll call it, to get from one place to another, a little bit better bridging process, but we can work on that over time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. There's no more questions.
By the way, while we're here, I want to mention, just so we remember it, we're on these pages that Jill had us, we're perilously close to pages 37, 38, and 39, which I really want us to come back to. These are the unduplicated appropriations, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it the first day, but I do want to come back and look at those when we get into our deliberations.
Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is risk management function. We want to increase the safety of the city work environments through inspections and safety training in each department. Our objective is to conduct quarterly evaluations of departments, progress in reducing risk and occurrences of injuries. Our benchmarks would be the evaluations, the results, and the corrections, and the number of workers' comp claims and liability claims. And I know that Corey has done several of these. He did some impromptu reviews of job sites and made some recommendations to the departments. We haven't formalized this yet or created a comprehensive list of all the locations and whether or not we're getting out there regularly and evaluating them. But this is one of our long-term objectives. Next slide. Okay, so now we're into purchasing, and I'll have Brian stand by, because if you have questions on this, he's most likely the one going to be able to answer them. He created a lot of this presentation here. I tried to coordinate it with mine and made sure we had mentioned what we have in the budget book as far as the performance measures. So, Brian, stand by.
I'm here.
Okay, next page. Go ahead. You can lead if you've seen the slides. I mean, they're a little bit different than what you had, but.
I'm good to go.
Okay.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Happy to say I found my replacement. Anyway, that just came in and manufactured up in beautiful downtown Linthicum Heights. So that aside, so most of my goals have to do with processes and making things a little bit easier, going paperless, and those sorts of things. So we are currently implementing the check request module. It's in testing, and we hope to roll it out, once we're able to get back together and get some training out there. But it's something that's always been in Munis, but we're just getting around to getting it up and going. Second objective in creating efficiency is reviewing the contracting and project management modules. Now, we own those two modules. We did not implement them when we first rolled out Munis because it was going to be overwhelming for our users to figure out, what's going where. The contracting module is another way to divvy up purchase orders and assign them to specific items. The project management module will help us out in mainly, I guess, our DPW folks in their large projects. This will also, help us track some minority business usage that we do not currently get because everything's assigned to, if it's a large company like Whiting Turner or thereabouts, those folks have plenty of subcontractors that may be minority businesses, but we're not capturing those dollars. I'll speak about that in a minute as well. Second big goal is to expand the use and accountability on the P cards. We were able to.
We need to, yeah, there we go. I was going to say move your slide, but they did it.
Okay, sorry. We were able to, pass the procurement code this year, and what that's going to create, is a lot of going back and updating policies, procedures, etc. And one of the ones is the P cards. We do have P card usage now, but with the new code, essentially a lot of the purchases, small purchases, will be done via the credit card. Munis also has a way to tie that in, that we're looking at that as well, so we can get some P card stuff and get all our transactions in Munis, so it's all in one spot. So again, the check request will do that. The P card program will do that as well. So we're looking to roll everything into Munis as much as we can. The next slide. So again, we do want to enhance our participation in the usage of MBE firms, minority firms. The main objective is to create a formal policy, and that's something that we've drafted and need to circulate and get some input to finalize that and establish some sort of goal or standard that we would like to meet. Generally over the last since FY11, when we implemented Munis, we've been averaging between 8 and 18% of minority business usage. But again, that is understated, frankly, because we do not capture a lot of the capital improvement dollars that have gone to minority firms, as a subcontractor.
How can we help as a council with the MBE policy that you mentioned, and eventually getting it so that we can vote on it and be more aggressive with bringing a minority business participation in city business?
Well, so again, once we get the policy and figure out some sort of standard, I can include that in our procurements, in the RFPs and in the IFBs. We can establish that they have, the bidders would have to show that either they've had a track record of using minority businesses, and in construction, if they know who they're going to use, and they can tell us how many dollars are going towards that subcontractor via minority firms.
Hey Brian, this is Ellie Tierney. Hi.
Hi, Ellie.
This is pretty much standard operating procedure in other municipalities. So I know I talked to Attorney Michael Lyles about implementing this. I found when I was working on the sprinkler bill that we had nothing in policy or in the code. So my question is, does it have to be codified, or can we simply proceed in it being a policy and then part of your procurement documents?
Well, I think either way is fine, but if we definitely put it in the policy, then it'll be part of the standard process that we'd use when we're going out to bid and we have stuff on the street.
Okay.
All right. And I'll add that one of the hurdles, and I don't know if Brian has elaborated on this earlier when he brought it up, is trying to, for our size government, for our size contracts, what is a good goal? How do you set those goals? We were looking for a comparable municipality that had established a policy to find out how they would determine what their goals are. Like, do you set a percentage? How did you determine that percentage? But we couldn't find anybody that was really comparable to us. So it may take some thought and some research to figure out in for what we're doing, what would be the best way to approach this? Do you want to set targets? What would those targets be? One, we have to quantify what we're currently doing, because like Brian explained, our contractors hire subcontractors. Right now, we're not tracking who those subcontractors are. So we don't know where we're at right now with minority firm usage. So we know, do we want to push it higher? How can we push it higher? What's a good goal? Do you want to set numerical goals, or do you just want to say we need to get more? Always looking for more. So that is one of the challenges.
Yeah, it'd be good to start in probably in baby steps. And if we can increase that goal as we go along, that would be the best way to go, I believe.
So, David, would you be able to speak to that, similar to what Brian is talking about, but with some of our the bigger projects that we have coming up, like the garage, like City Dock, revitalization, and making sure that we hire our citizens and the minority businesses to participate in what will be huge contracts. So what would be able to get something like that done? I know he just said to take baby steps, and now I'm saying the opposite. But prior to them handing out those bigger contracts.
Yeah, we need to work through this, because there's been a lot of municipalities and other government agencies that have been sued over setting goals where they're mandatory goals. So what we want is we want to have aspirational goals, and we want to require that the contractors do outreach to see what's available out there, and then to bring those on as much as possible. But there's a lot of legal issues involved with saying you shall subcontract this amount. It needs to be, we encourage that, and we use that as rating criteria for the selection of the firms. But we need to steer clear of mandating that a certain percentage has to be subcontracted, because those have not been upheld in court.
Yeah, the other thing to do is to work with economic development. They can have an initiative that helps promote minority businesses, not necessarily through the city usage, but the private. There's a lot of private business out there for minority firms to take advantage of. Private developers, Park Place, these big developments go up. It's not city oriented, but there's opportunities there for minority firms to participate. I think the next slide is actually Jody's finance budget request. Is that right?
Let me unmute myself before I start talking. All right, so what this is I know you had been asking about the different accounts and what we're spending out of the different accounts. And I think this is a kind of an idea of some of the detail you like with these line items. And what we did here is we have repair and maintenance, we have legal services, we have accounting services. And in the past, most of it got dumped into these accounting services line item. But what Katie did a really good job of this year is splitting it out for the 21 budget into the pockets it needs to go into. So what we did this is a vendor comparison here. So in 21, these amounts in the 21 column should tie into our request by line item. And these are either the vendors or the services that we're actually paying for with those monies. So I just wanted to provide that to you if you wanted to look at it and have any questions. I will point out, this is a good opportunity to show you in accounting services, the savings that we have generated over the last couple years. I just got my quote from the auditors for next year. They are going to charge us $85,000 compared to FY 19 and 20, which was closer to $130,000. And that is because the finance department is now preparing the comprehensive annual financial report. And that's something that the auditors had been doing themselves, taking our accounting records and preparing that document. It's a very large document with lots of components, lots of reconciliations to be done. And this year we did it ourselves for the first time. And it started out with having each of our accountants produce a set of financial statements. And then I did most of the rolling that up into a big document with lots of help from my staff on some of the more detailed sections. So we have been able to save a significant amount of money by bringing that Apr in-house. But again, it's a time, it's time consuming, very time consuming. But yeah, so some of those line items you see savings. The financial advisors cost less this year. Was able to save some money there. Closing our old bond proceeds and unneeded accounts has saved us some trustee funds. As you can see there, I was talking about getting the accounts closed. We were able to save $3,500 for next year, and we should see more closing out in 21. Anyways, this, I won't go into detail of each line item, but this can show you what we've had in our budget for FY20 and what we have going into 21, service by service.
I want to thank you for this. And also now I know where I put punches on these documents and inserted in the budget book after page 90. So I now have some of my housekeeping taken care of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, so if you go to the next slide, there might be a... Okay, so this is a continuation of that same thing. We've got contract services. You see some of the things we pay for. Brinks, the shredding contract. Level 1 is the company that prints and mails our utility bills. This $50,000, I've got it in there for other contractual services as needed. Our copier lease, next year we're going to have to get a new copier. The thing is, we'll not do two-sided copying, and we need to conserve paper. And we're having a big problem with that when we scan something that's two-sided. So we got to get a new copier. It's getting very old, and we're going to try to lease one. And then you just look down the line there, you can see what we're using each line item for. So I think that provides you a lot of detail. Next slide. And the purchasing, the staff, this slide, Brian created that so you could see we have the senior buyer is vacant right now. We've run the advertisements. We've had responses, but we don't know how to interview people and bring them on board when you can't really train them from a distance. So that may have to hold off for a couple months until we're getting more back to normal as far as the workplace is concerned. And then it shows you here in 20 how we had a budget 439 and the projected cost is saving us 120, and most of that's from the big vacancy that stayed open for the whole year, which we talked a lot about when they were asking for the funding for the senior buyer. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is you wanted to know what enhancements we had requested. The first one I talked about a little bit, an assistant finance director. As that position vacated and I decided what we needed at the time, the answer at that time was a senior accountant. And now that I see how everything's distributed and understand better the workload after having been here, that's the void I see. I have a lower level vacancy that I plan to fill, but even if the funding for that could be put towards this, there would still be a big gap that we would need to provide extra funding in the budget because the lower level position doesn't have as high pay. So I don't think there's any way we're going to get this done this time around. And so I just hope for that for the future and just try to keep going through the next year and hope I don't burn myself out. And then capital outlay, we wanted to get some funding for some new chairs. We already had asked for some funding for new chairs. We're going to order some, but we're not going to be able to buy them all. And I was hoping to get some standing desks for the staff that wanted them so that we don't have to be sitting still all day, every day. And so those are things that I had to forego, and there's some questions, so I'll wait for questions. Alderman Gay?
How does that work? that you just aren't able to go buy the supplies that you need to run your office effectively?
Well, so we do have a funding for supplies, which is, you know, envelopes, paper, pencils, pens, pads of paper, whatever falls under that category. This is capital outlay. This is more expensive things like chairs that cost more, that are capital in nature, and they're more expensive. So carving out some of your budget to pay for those, it takes a bit more funding. And what we did this year is we found some extra funding, and I had a lot of turnover earlier in the year, and we also had some savings in contract services. So we've moved some money down into the capital outlay category so that we can buy some chairs, but we also need a folding machine, an inserter and folder. And because that's broken down now, we're doing all of our folding and inserting by hand right now. So we need a new one of those. So we're going to have to use some of those funds for the inserter and won't be able to buy as many chairs as we had planned. So we're going to get rid of the worst ones. And then
the new fiscal year to do so?
I'm sorry, what?
You have to wait until the start of the new fiscal year to do so?
No, this is the first round of the folder, inserter, and the chairs we're going to do out of this year's budget. But we were going to put money in next year's budget to do the rest of the chairs and try to get standing desks for those who want them.
And what about copier? Because that seems important too, that you aren't able to.
Copier, we own this copier, but it's very old. And like I say, we pay a lot of repair money on this copier. We have money in next year's budget already for leasing a new copier. It's already in there. That's something that we have to put in because we won't be able to survive without a copier.
Thank you.
Okay. No other questions. I'll.
We have one more slide, right?
Yeah, just I think one more. I think. Next slide. So when I was asked to come up with, I say I was asked, I was one of the requesters of all the departments to give up some money. So I went through my budget and I said, where can we take things out? And I'll be upfront to say we had $50,000 earmarked for the audits that the audit committee appropriates for, like the rec and parks, and we got 50,000 in this year's budget for it. We reduced that to 25, so maybe we can't do as many. That's one thing that I reduced. Overtime, I took a $5,000 reduction of overtime. We've had a lot of overtime in the past, and hopefully that'll be reduced because we're now getting to full staffing levels. So I'm hoping that will be significantly lower in 21. The staff here that are high enough, if they work too much overtime, they get comp time for it. I took out some money for supplies, hoping that outsourcing payroll and implementing the ACH payment system that I spoke of earlier, hoping that will save us a couple $1,000s in supplies. And we took some money out of training, which is unfortunate. I really did not want to do that. I think what we have there is going to have to be really targeted to really important training. And for instance, if I go on training, the staff will have to pick up anything extra they want to do themselves. Next, okay. Is that the end?
Well, if your next slide is the end, but.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I have a great team here, and the only reason that we're able to do what we do, I have a great team. We're constantly putting in extra hours. I've got people that are here late almost every night. We're the last ones, typically the last ones to close down the building. And they're so dedicated. And there's been a couple here that a lot of them are newer and they're still giving all their extra effort to help us move along. And they take on, because of our short staff situations, they've all taken on other duties and they're very flexible and they're great. Best team I've ever worked with.
Well, that's very good to hear. As you have observed, I was very effusive in my praise for Public Works presentation to us, and I have to say I find yours on a par with that. I said earlier in your presentation, there you go, Katie, that I really like the way you've constructed your goals and objectives, and I did like the benchmarks that you included. And it's always, I think, for the council, a revelation every time we hear from the departments, the things that they do for us that go on day in and day out without our real direct observation of it. And I do have some special sympathy for the finance department. I was close friends with Mr. Elliott and with Mr. Miller, and I really do, along with Public Works, Park Planning and Zoning. Finance is the department that I have a special affinity for, but I think I'm not alone on the council. So I really do want to thank you for this very thorough presentation, and I would welcome input from other colleagues on the Finance Committee or the council at this point.
Ditto.
Much more succinct than I was.
Yeah. So I will share with you, like I told you as I'm sitting here, this list things have come across my desk since we've been sitting here, including bank payroll or wire transfers that I have to approve. So, there's just a lot of this kind of work that ties up my day that is not really getting to the guts of what I need to be doing with my time. So.
Jody, would you speak to, this is not about your department, but would you speak to what department has made the most sacrifices in terms of cuts over so that we could, balance out? Is it Parks and Recs? Or am I reading this wrong?
So you can take, if you're looking at the number of cuts, Recs and Parks, because they have a lot of different divisions, they're divided up into I don't know, how many, 12, Katie? The 10 or 12 divisions. And so when they take their cuts, they're taking them in many different pieces. I'd say they all did what they could. It's difficult for some departments because they just don't have that much extra, like fire. You can't give them a lot of turnover because when fire has a vacancy, they have to fill it with somebody else and pay overtime. So I thought all of them did a really good job, and you can ask city manager about that, David, I just thought everybody did a pretty good job of scrubbing it. I was really impressed with IT, got a good cut out of there. Just a couple $100,000, removing, maybe I'm wrong at the amount, but it was a sizable amount. And it was just, there's a service that we were doing that we're not, right now we're doing it with other people because the person that did it passed away, and we've been kind of using other sources that we have and just making it work, and he's thinking that we could continue with that in the meantime. So, I was surprised at things like that. People come in really scrubby.
Yeah, I would agree. So in the past, we've had to do this, and oftentimes the departments would offer up things that you just knew they absolutely could not cut. So it makes it difficult. I don't think we went through that exercise this time. I think everybody played it real, and they offered up things that they felt like, even though they're important, because you heard some of the things that Jody gave up, that they're important, that hopefully they can live without. I think it was pretty much even across the board. I wouldn't single out any specific department that gave more than others. We asked for 10% of the non-salary budget, and they offered that up.
And then with this is again on a different one, with the homeownership assistance trust fund. So would you be able to explain to me where the is the $148,000 being applied to?
Hey, can you tell me what you're looking at, please?
Yeah, on page 94, sorry.
That's okay. So that's in planning and zoning.
Okay.
And that is some older grant funds that we received that we can use for various purposes, including helping people buy their own homes, and we help them with closing costs and things like that. And that would be a Teresa Wellman question. That's one of her programs.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say there's actually, when you're saying 148, that's the FY20 projected amount of what they think they're going to spend this year. And the 21 proposed budget is 794. So there's a lot more funds in there that can be used. And she finds her projects and uses them as well as she can.
Okay, so the 148 is just what they, okay, what they.
Yeah, what they're using this year. They've got some purchase orders in process, some work in process.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are grossly over time. We have some other things that we had discussed yesterday that we'll have to pick up when we get into deliberations. One of those is the discussion of the Office of Environmental Policy. And then I think we get into deliberations I think that's right, next week. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm looking forward to having tomorrow and the weekend off. This has been a lot of work for the committee as well as for all the departments. I saw Katie smile when I lauded the presentation. I do want to thank her. I know she's one of the driving forces behind all of this work. So thank you, Katie, for what you do for us. We appreciate it, and we want to recognize it.
I appreciate that very much.
Are there any other things before we get Fred's services to adjourn and run off to get some lunch? I'm starving.
Me too.
Yeah, I've been gnawing on my arm for the last 20 minutes, guys. I'd like to thank everybody for taking up Ross's a dying plea to use 10 words when you could have just used one. But besides that, good job, Jody. It was very well done. Thank you very much.
I too would like to thank everyone. You're us ahead and at a pretty decent clip. And so I want to wish you a restful Friday and weekend, and stay safe.
Same to everybody. Thank you for allowing us to present.
Just quickly want to say thank you guys for being patient and walking with me through this process and catching up to everything. Thank you very much.
Appreciate all the questions.
Mr. Fred.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that emotion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And David, I know I owe you something, and I'm working on it, and I will